Are you right, Graham? Yeah.
Good morning.
Okay. Oh, no, sorry. I'll just have to kick off briefly. But look, I now declare open this hearing of the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Economics for its inquiry into insurers' responses to the 2022 major floods claims. Today we'll be hearing from councils, business associations and members of the community in Townsville to better understand insurer responses to flood claims from recent natural disasters, including the 2019 floods and Cyclone Kirrily, issues around insurance affordability and the actions being taken to mitigate flood risk in the future. I just wanted to say from the outset that this is a wide-ranging inquiry. We have started this inquiry with public hearings with the insurance industry. We heard from all CEOs directly and asked for extensive evidence from those companies, both analytical and financial. We also held public hearings with the regulators and also with peak national bodies providing assistance to individual consumers. We've now followed that up with a number of regional hearings, and we see this as being absolutely critical to us developing a deep understanding of the ways in which these natural disasters affected different communities. So we very much appreciate people, organisations and individuals from Townsville coming here today. I might also just say that the key focus of this inquiry is the 2022 floods, but we have held hearings yesterday in Cairns and today in Townsville because preceding floods are also very relevant to our understanding of insurance industry responses, but also the events that occurred in late 23 and 24 are relevant in the sense that they give us an insight into whether the insurance industry has lifted its game post-22. So we're certainly interested to hear any insights from witnesses today in relation to the more recent events. I just wanted to say, for anyone who wishes to share their story but has not yet contacted the Secretariat and completed a Hansard witness form, please make yourselves known to the Secretariat staff as soon as possible. For all participants, please remember that this hearing is being broadcast on the Parliament's website and YouTube channel, and the transcript of the proceedings will be published on the website, including your name and what you say. For anyone not comfortable speaking, there are other ways to provide your experience to the committee, including through making a submission, including a confidential submission if you wish, and completing our anonymous online survey. I also remind any members of the media who may be listening or in the room today of the need to report the committee's proceedings fairly and accurately. Before formally introducing the first witness, I might just say my name's Daniel Molino. I'm an MP for a seat in Melbourne called Fraser. It's a seat which actually has the highest flood risk of any area in Metro Melbourne. So I'm here in my capacity as Chair of the Economics Committee, but also as a local member whose community is very much affected by flood risk. So there's a very close alignment there. And I might just let my colleague introduce himself too.
I'm Shane Newman, the federal member for Blair, and in my 17 years in federal parliament we've had 3 major floods in Ipswich and surrounds, and the Wovenhoe Dam, the Somerset Dam, the Brisbane River, the Bremer River and the Lockyer Creek in my electorate. So having been as a kid a victim of a flood and having been involved in lots of different insurance inquiries over the years, I think this is a really important thing, and I want to thank the Townsville Council for coming, and particularly the efforts that you made in the 2022 floods, and it's great to be back here at the RSL in Townsville and see that it's been restored after it was really badly flood affected. So congratulations to the local RSL and to Townsville Council.
Thanks, Mr. Newman. So now I welcome representatives of Townsville City Council. Before we proceed, I wish to advise that while the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, hearings are legal proceedings of the Australian Parliament, and the giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter which could be regarded as contempt of the Parliament. Before I ask you to make an opening statement, could I ask for the benefit of Hansard that each of you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And I might start on my left with Ms Bolton.
Nairi Bolton, Manager of City Growth, Townsville City Council. Thank you.
Andrew Robinson, Townsville City Council, Councillor.
Thanks.
Zach Dawes, Team Manager, Emergency Management, Townsville City Council.
Oh, thank you all. Could I invite you to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Andrew Robinson and I'm the chair of the Townsville Local Disaster Management Group, as well as being a divisional councillor for the Townsville City Council. On my left, I have Zach Dawes, who is the team manager for the Emergency Management and Local Disaster Coordinator, and Nairi Bolton on my right, who is the manager for City Growth. And we are here to represent the council as well as the TLDMG, the Townsville Local District Management Group. North Queensland is one of the most disaster-prone regions in Australia. Townsville has experienced a number of significant disaster events over the years, from Tropical Cyclone Althea, the 1998 Night of Noah flood, Tropical Cyclone Yassi, Tropical Cyclone Larry, the 2019 monsoon floods, and more recently, Tropical Cyclone Kirrily. Local residents accept that by living in Townsville, they may be exposed to the risks of natural hazards. Their exposure to that hazard will vary depending on a number of factors, including, but not limited to, the location of their property, the building age and materials used in construction. Whilst there are a number of factors that may influence the level of risk, there is also a number of actions to mitigate against these risks. Individuals can implement mitigation measures into their households, while local government implements strategies through community education, good planning practices and strong policy development. The inquiry today is focused on the major floods of 2022. As Townsville did not experience any flooding in that year, we instead would like to give an insight into our two most recent events, being the 2019 monsoon floods and Tropical Cyclone Kirrily in January 2024, to which I will provide a brief overview. 2019 floods. There is a report by the Inspector General, Emergency Management, into the 2019 monsoon trough and flood, and I will read parts of that in this summary. During late January and into early February 2019, a monsoon trough and slow-moving low-pressure system was located over the Townsville region, causing heavy and prolonged rainfall. The 2019 weather event was the largest rainfall event to have occurred over the Townsville catchment in the past 120 years. To put it into perspective, over the course of the 2019 weather event, the Ross River Dam received 850,000 megalitres of rainfall, which is 3.8 times the Ross River Dam's capacity. Once full supply level of water had been reached in the Ross River Dam, the dam gates started to open in an automatic mode as per the operational rules for the dam. The dam gates progressively opened in response to the further water level rises until the gates were fully open at 8:32 p.m. on Sunday, 3rd of February. The water level in the dam peaked at 43.03 metres, which represents 247% capacity of the dam. At 11:50 on Sunday the 3rd of February, releasing approximately 1,888 cubic metres of water into the Ross River. Major flooding occurred along the Ross River throughout the Saturday, Sunday and Monday, with water levels in the Ross River easing by Tuesday 5th of February. It is estimated that 3,300 properties were damaged due to the flooding in Townsville. Out of the 3,300 properties, 2,063 properties suffered minor damage, 1,101 properties suffered moderate damage, and the remaining 135 properties were severely damaged. According to the risk management report, there were a total of 21,515 insurance claims made as of 23rd of February 2019, with insured losses totalling $887 million at the time of writing. Residential properties contributed 91.2% of the total claims, while commercial claims made up the remaining 8.8%. The 2021 independent evaluation of Townsville's recovery reported insurance friction as a major contributor to reducing the pace of the recovery outcomes. Barriers to appropriate business insurance cover included complex contracts and documents, a lack of awareness of products to suit their needs, and the perceived unaffordability of flood insurance options. Some business owners who purchased insurance through brokers did not receive the policy coverage they had requested. In some instances, people may have accepted inferior outcomes to avoid costs and further stress arising from ongoing disputes and delays. The Office of Queensland and Small Business Commissioner reported reinsurance became inaccessible due to increased premium costs and refusal from the insurers, which can then create a legal liability for the business. The AFCA reported receiving 233 complaints, 229 of which were general insurance complaints and 4 related to banking. Over half of the complaints related to denial of a claim, and over a quarter concerned delay and poor service issues. Complaints received by the AFCA Complaints advised by the AFCE were of no contact by their insurer, uncertainty about who to contact, unreturned telephone calls, and uncertainty about next steps. I'll now talk about Tropical Cyclone Kirrily. Tropical Cyclone Kirrily crossed the coast as a Category 2 system approximately 30 kilometres north of Townsville late on Thursday the 25th of January 2024. Townsville and majority of its 200,000 plus residents experienced a wind field more consistent with a low category level 1 cyclone. Swirl net towers recorded maximum gusts in the range of 85 kilometres to 120 kilometres per hour. The system delivered light rainfalls totalling 30 to 60 millimetres, occurring mostly on Thursday, with the northern beaches receiving larger totals of 60 to 82 millimetres. The highest rainfall recorded was at Paluma, with 176 millimetres. The rainfall had little effect other than Rolling Stone Creek, which reached the minor flood level on Thursday evening. The Ross River Dam catchment received 43 millimetres of rainfall and rose by a modest 120 millimetres, peaking at 65.33% on Sunday morning. The Ross River Dam emergency procedures was not triggered. The cyclone crossed the coast during spring tides, fortunately coinciding with the minor high tide, and the storm tide level remained below the highest astronomical tide, or HAT. This also occurred at a time when Townsville was experiencing an extreme heat wave. The greatest impact of tropical cyclone involved was power loss. Fallen trees, power line damage, and the need to isolate wider areas to facilitate repair work were the primary causes of power outages. Approximately 53,000 customers across Townsville were without power for a 5 to 7 day period, with the impacts from the widespread power loss, which were extensive, including compounding the effect of severe heat wave by introducing significant public health risks to response workers and the community, compromising water treatment, storage and distribution, leading to restricted services, and disruption to digital and telecommunications, traffic signals, and water and wastewater pump stations. Damage was minimal, with assessments reporting at least 1 shed destroyed, while 12 other buildings had minor to moderate damage. 10 boats had slipped their moorings and were washed ashore. Otherwise, domestic damage was largely due to fallen trees and debris, obstructing access, damaging cars, building fences, water mains, and the like. Rainwater ingress and also stormwater flooding. Sorry, I'll just take a break here.
No, please.
The Economic Recovery Subgroup. As part of the Queensland Disaster Management Arrangements, the Townsville Local Disaster Management Group has formed the Local Recovery and Resilience Group, otherwise known as the LRRG, and it has 4 functions or elements of recovery to which it is split into. The Economic Recovery Subgroup is one of the functions and is tasked with liaising with the insurance sector to ensure speedy response and recovery. The Economic Subgroup was activated during the 2019 floods and Tropical Cyclone Kirrily. The subgroup played a major role in the recovery in 2019 and coordinated, planned, implemented, monitored and reported on the economic recovery measures within the local government area. Due to the minimal level of impact of Tropical Cyclone Kirrily, the Economic Subgroup was not required to play a key role. They did activate and provided information on accessing grant funding for the community and businesses. council insurance. Just like the residents of Townsville City, Townsville's council's insurance has been affected due to the recent events. After the 2019 floods, council had 583 insured assets damaged, and a total cost of insurable losses was $17,392,318.20.
Well, thank you for the accuracy.
We try, thanks. At the time of the 2019 monsoon events, our excess applicable for named cyclone was $50,000. Because the flood event was an unprecedented event and not specifically named, our insurer could only charge us the normal excess applicable for an ISR claim, which is $5,000. Council also had 65 third-party claims lodged against them. Since that event, our policy has changed significantly, with an event with a much broader definition now having an excess of $250,000. Further claims affected and catastrophic exposure risks have continued to see the premium increases, and insurers have remained selective with respect to the acceptance of taking on clients exposed to the risks with these characteristics. Claims and economic inflation giving rise to the increased exposure and loss expenditure and increased reinsurance costs continue to be the major drivers for these continued increases. Following Tropical Cyclone Kirrily, Council had 60 insured assets damaged and 21 third-party claims lodged against them. At this stage, Council is unsure if the total repair costs will exceed the appropriate excess, which is $250,000. Disaster recovery funding arrangements through the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. Through the disaster recovery funding arrangements, Council is able to claim costs against eligible disasters, providing they meet the requirements set out in the guidelines. Following the 2019 floods, Council lodged 118 submissions under DRFA, with approximately $122 million, with an approximate value of $122 million. Approximately $35.8 million in DFRA funding across a range of programs was provided to Council. Approximately $72 million was deemed ineligible as it was outside the funding guidelines, or Council had insufficient pre-event evidence to demonstrate the damage was event-related. To date, Council has expended more than $14 million related to recovery operations on Cyclone Kirrily. We have claimed $7,451,000 under the DRFA and have potentially, subject to resourcing, to claim a further $6.5 million in emergency works and reconstruction of the essential public assets, or REPA. Damaged assets that we are currently building damage submissions for. Finally, I would like to thank you very much for coming here to Townsville today and for hearing our voice on these matters, which are of concern to people within not only Townsville but the North Queensland region. And finally, I'll finish with these words that disasters within North Queensland are only a matter of not if, but when. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. Look, and I think those precautionary words apply in a lot of areas, and I think there's been a lot of analysis that federally and at the state level we've spent too high a proportion on recovery after events rather than preparing for them or mitigating, and I think that reflects the fact that we don't take those final words into account as much as we should. But thanks very much for a very thorough opening statement. Look, I'll start with some questions and then hand over to my colleague, Mr. Newman. Look, I just wanted to start with Council's role in the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster. Council, in a lot of ways, becomes the main source of support in the hours and days following a natural disaster. Typically, it's Council that sets up emergency hubs and refuges. Just interested in if you could talk through, like in relation to both 2019 and Kirrily, and just generally, what does Council do? What has it done to provide a hub for people to go to for various government services to set up for not-for-profits? How does that work?
Certainly, Chair. I may throw over to Zach, as he is the subject matter expert, and given my limited time, only 100-odd days within council, but I will say this of council. The advantage of council operating these functions are that we are the people on the ground. We know the area, we know the people, we know the local roads and infrastructure and so forth. So therefore, I think council is the most appropriate people to oversee these functions. But I'll now hand over to Zach, and he can provide you with the rest of the information.
Thank you, Chair. So under the Queensland Disaster Management Act, so council has the responsibility of providing a disaster response capability. So not only do we have that response capability, but we also then form the makeup of the local disaster management group. So that group is chaired and deputy by a councillor, and then the local disaster coordinator. We have a number of agencies under that group, the emergency services, and we have Department of Housing, Recovery and alike. When it comes then to recovery, the disaster management group will stand up. They'll then activate the recovery group, and the recovery group will begin their response in the event. So the actual response of a disaster doesn't quite work parallel with the recovery, but they work hand in hand. So we have a recovery group. We have 4 elements of the recovery: economic, human and social, infrastructure, and the natural environment. Between the human and social and the economic recovery subgroups, they'll work together and they'll stand up recovery hubs through the Department of now the Treaty, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Partnership, Community and the Arts, and we'll work with our local people on the ground. Council will identify the locations that will require that hub, and that will be based off an analysis of this community has been more impacted, or we feel there's a need to have a pop-up or an outreach into that location. And then the department comes in, and then through their channels, they'll provide the services on the ground for people to come in and access that funding support and those different services. Part of the role of the Economic Recovery Group then is sort of liaising with the insurers, with the different sort of agencies around the economics, and that's not only of the grant funding, but bringing the city's economy sort of back into life and the resilience of.
So on that economic team's work, so is it typical that insurance companies or the insurance peak body will be present at these hubs immediately following the natural disaster, or is it that they liaise through your economics team at first instance typically?
Locally on the ground, we would like to think that everything comes through the local economy group, but Nairi was part of the economic recovery group, and she might be able to touch a bit of light on that firsthand.
I can speak to the latest flooding incident. For 2019, I believe there was strong engagement with the insurance groups.
Yep.
However, for the latest event, due to its nature of severity, the liaison happened externally, so they weren't present at the hub. The economic subgroup was stood up sometime after the event because the response was ongoing through the management of green waste. The impact to small business predominantly was power outage, and for those hospitality type businesses and food wastage. Department of Small Business conducted a survey throughout Cairns and Townsville. They have those results, although they did not release those results. So I can, on notice, come back to you if we can actually get those findings.
Yeah, that'd be useful, thanks. But I'm thinking also about a situation. So the power outage is a particular kind of challenge, and it'd be interesting to get more insight into that. But with flooding, for example, both for small businesses and residential situations, quite often there's a set of issues around cleaning up in the immediate aftermath, but then there's challenges around what documentation people should create. Should they take photos of things? Should they clean out before an assessor arrives, or immediately, or wait till an assessor arrives? And we've certainly heard evidence that in many situations, different people are hearing different messages from different insurers. So one suggestion that's been made is that at these emergency hubs that council sets up, that we should be able to provide people with standardised Q&As that basically are industry-wide, that are consistent across all firms, that could include, for example, a schedule of what you should expect in relation to how your claims will be handled over the coming weeks, but that could also, for example, include some basic Q&As around how you should clean out your property. Do you think that kind of information would be useful for council to have on hand to be able to hand out to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think your suggestion of a standardised insurance toolkit would be really useful. What we do here in Adodali from either Chamber of Commerce or Townsville Enterprise and their members is they have a different experience depending on their insurer. So a standardised approach may be very beneficial. As far as preparedness for residents and businesses, there are existing toolkits available. So part of the work that the economic subgroup was looking at was having preparedness as part of the proactive to the disaster season, go out to community before we hit an event. So that
how do you
work
go
is
out to
ongoing.
community?
Sorry?
How would you go out to community?
The plan is still ongoing, so it's around communicating through electronic means, using our department for assistance in that distribution, our chambers, our Townsville Enterprise, and those membership-based organisations to reach out to the community and businesses especially.
And as part of my team and our daily role, we do preparedness, resilience, mitigation with the community through community education. So we pre-season and leading up to that November, we ramp up and do a lot of events where we talk about sort of preparing your home and that sort of thing. And we follow the state Get Ready model of the 3 steps to get ready. And the first one being understanding your risk and then having a plan. And part of that is looking at your insurances and how they align, and is your policy up to date? Is it sufficient? And then on our Townsville City Council website, we have information and resources about the before, during and after event. And then as part of that, after the event, it's sort of the cleaning up of your home. And then in the before, we have like prepare your household and your business as well. So we have quite a lot of resources that the community can access. And through my team, we sort of get that message out where that can happen.
Yeah, great. It'd be good to get a couple of the standard documents just for information about what kinds of things households receive. Sorry.
No, sorry, Chair. Just on your point regarding standard Q&As being offered, the issue may very well be that for some of these disaster events, they will be impacting a large number of people, potentially over a large area as well. Most people I find are fairly resilient here in Townsville. The people who have been here a long time have been through these things before, and basically they just want to get on and move on with their life again. So if there is a policy of, for example, waiting until the insurance assessor comes through, sometimes that can be quite a lengthy period of time, given large number of houses that would need to be assessed, assessors generally not having a main office here in Townsville and having to bring up additional people, and the like. So I guess that would be the only thing I would caution in there about having a standard response to it, because it may not necessarily meet the requirements. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you what the longest period of time was from a person putting in their claim before an assessor actually came out, but I would suggest it would be longer than what would be satisfactory to most people.
Yeah, well, no, if anything, I think if we were going to move towards standard approaches, I think it would be to suggest don't wait. Yeah, I think at the moment there have been some insurers saying just clean out, but document. Some people have definitely received the message to wait, but then that's often taken weeks and was a very suboptimal outcome. So, look, without wanting to prejudge where everything might head, my sense is that if anything, if you were to standardise this, it would be much more to err on the side of getting people to act faster. But I take on board your comments. Just wanted to get to your own insurance. Look, the sense we're getting from local government right around Australia is that insuring council assets is becoming more expensive, but at the same time, the reinsurance arrangements are requiring councils to put up with higher excesses. In Queensland, there's obviously a joint arrangement. It does vary a bit by jurisdiction, but I just wanted to ask, so you've already covered a bit of this in your evidence, but your premiums are going up for insuring your assets.
Shall I throw over to...
Yeah, so that was through the work that I sort of put in prior to this, talking to our sort of finance and insurance team. That's certainly the case. As Councillor Robinson already said, the excess from 5,000 to 250,000 on the back of 2019. In terms of specific assets, to my knowledge, I'm not too sure, and that's certainly something we could come back with.
But the other thing we've heard from some local government areas is that in addition to the excess increasing, they're having to make choices based on budget constraints to self-insure an increasing number of assets over time. Is that something that you're aware of in Townsville?
Yeah, again, I don't have that sort of
That's fine.
knowledge, and something we can come back to you on, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really more just to get the sense that, in a sense, there's trends occurring at local government level that we're seeing at the household level, which is not surprising. But of course, it's relevant in the sense that ultimately when events happen, and as you say, it's not a question of if but when, to the extent that councils are having to self-insure more, either through higher excesses or taking some assets out of what is covered by insurance, that then means that ratepayers are more exposed to having to ultimately pay for repairs. So it's really just interesting for us to get a sense of how much that exposure is rising.
Certainly. We can take that on notice, Chair. Prima facie, however, it would appear that we are paying more for our insurance going forward. And there are also some assets that we just simply can't insure, our road structure being one such area where there is a lot of money invested because we are a large area and we do have a large road coverage.
So that segues into my next couple of questions around mitigation. Are there major mitigation projects that you feel are important and time sensitive given the risks that you're exposed to?
I guess I'll start off and then I'll throw over if you wouldn't mind. Anecdotally, I've heard that the issue that we have with the recovery funds is that it will only be providing us with the amount of funding for replacement at original cost of the asset. And as we know, steel prices have significantly increased over the last couple of years, production costs and the like. So therefore, sometimes replacing like with like is a far more expensive option than what we're being insured for or being recovered for. So I guess that's my first indication, but I'll now throw over to Nairi.
So Townsville is undergoing a city plan amendment and the flood and coastal mapping is being updated currently. So we are going out to public consultation later this year for feedback on the planning responses to that new mapping. So that really will put Townsville in a great position to future-proof not just flood but also coastal and erosion issues leading into the future.
No, that's interesting. And in a sense, it's only possible to develop the business cases for the most important and high priority mitigation projects once you've completed that flood modelling update.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, that's useful. And that really feeds into then a couple of questions around planning. So you're updating your flood modelling. So what's the expected timing of that?
So the public consultation will happen later this year, and then we'll propose a planning response that will go through to state interest review mid-next year, and then we hope to implement that into the planning scheme by end of next year, potentially the start of the following year, depending on the state interest review period.
Yeah. And so when that goes into the planning scheme, how does that affect your decisions? Is it, I mean, to oversimplify, does that then lead to a situation where, based on the updated modelling, if there's like a 1 in 100 year delineation, that you would have a strong presumption not to approve new developments beyond that, or is it basically even stronger than that, that it would be no new developments in greater than 1 in 100 risk?
That's the general principle. A little bit reluctant to say it at this point because we haven't gone out to the public for our planning response as yet. But essentially, yes, those areas that do have a high impact area we would avoid, and there will be controls in place through conditions of development. So what we have done while we're going through this major project is actually release some of the flood modelling for significant development to developers under a confidential agreement. And they're using that as we speak to future-proof the development happening on the ground now.
And this is more, I suppose, looking at previous instances, but even if a new arrangement is put into place in the planning schemes, it is possible that your decisions can be challenged and then potentially overturned on challenge. Does that happen?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get this clear. So you're talking about an application that comes through for development and the conditions. It may be, it could go through to P&E court, but our planning scheme is quite strong and the validation behind that and the reasoning behind some of those conditions are for protection. So it is possible in the likely event of someone challenging against a flood mapping or overlay of any hazard would be unlikely. Unlikely,
yeah. And if they were to challenge, would they have to, would the basis of that challenge have to involve a questioning of some aspects of the modelling in a sense, or would it be on some other basis?
It's probably not so much the modelling. It has gone through not just a third-party verification but peer review. So the modelling we feel is very sound and has plenty of rigour behind that. The conditions more around the application and the condition of approval would be challenged, not so much the mapping. Okay.
And in relation to the modelling, we've talked to some other local governments in Queensland and beyond. I mean, this is a costly exercise. Do you receive assistance from the state government to undertake updated flood modelling?
For this particular project, we have not. We did receive partial funding for a adaptation to coastal areas, which was CHAS, known locally. That's part way through, so we need to review that body of work as a part of this major amendment process.
But I can imagine that flood modelling is a difficult cost to incorporate within your budget.
Very much so. The planning aspect is one part, and then there is the mitigation process, which is obviously long-term financial planning, not just for council, but everyone involved in the city.
Mm-hmm. And part of our flood studies for the catchment areas, the Ross, Bowley and the Black, the state government did provide some funding through the Queensland Reconstruction Authority and the flood warning infrastructure program, I believe it is. I'll confirm that, but yeah, there's certainly some state funding there to assist with those flood studies.
No, that's useful. And if you're able to give us some, just to get a sense of how much the flood modelling costs, something I noticed that'd be useful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a challenge right around the country, and obviously generating the highest quality data is critical to dealing with these issues. And this is dealt with in different ways in different jurisdictions. It's something which I think the committee's going to have some interest in. Okay, well, look, I'll hand over to Mr Newman and circle back at the end if there's time.
Thanks very much. The results of floods go on to, I think this place here, the Townsville RSL was flooded in 2019 with the floods there, and took a long time to recover. It goes on for a long time for council, doesn't it?
It does.
One of the programs that operates in South, Central and West Queensland has been the Resilient Homes program, the $741 million federal and state government, Queensland state government program, but Townsville wasn't eligible for that at all. That involves voluntary buybacks, $50,000 for retrofitting, flood resilient for your home, $100,000 to raise it up. What do you think about that program, the concept of that program being not a reactive program but being a national program that Townsville would be eligible for? That the sort of thing, would you have homes that you'd like to see voluntarily bought back in Townsville?
Again, from the initial flood planning mapping that the council has already carried out, it would indicate that there are certain locations within Townsville that would not be encouraged or should not exist where they are. It's not ideal. So a program such as that would certainly be well received. And again, out of the various mitigating models, the buyback one is, we appreciate, very expensive and certainly well and truly out of our control. So therefore, any external assistance for that would be much appreciated.
Well, as the Chair said, we spend 97% of our flood expenditure is on recovery and reconstruction, and 3% only on prevention. So if we had a program like that rolled out nationally, I've seen the benefits of it in Ipswich and places, around East Ipswich and in Milton Dick, the Speaker's electorate in Goodna, places like that, we've seen that. So you could have a program like that. You mentioned Councillor Robinson, thousands of homes being affected by the 2019 flood. I imagine there'd be quite a few homes there that people would be, like to flood-proof their homes, that's for sure.
Look, that is true. There had been talk of levies and other bits and pieces. The problem with levies is that you're simply shifting the water from one location to another. And as with any new development that happens, we need to be cognizant of the fact that whatever we do to that new area then may have a flow-on impact upon surrounding areas too. So the ability to actually remove some things would certainly be a consideration and would be great. On the other side of the coin, I myself live by the river, and I guess anybody who has a house on the river, it would not be unrealistic to expect that at some stage there is a possibility and chance of flood. That is a risk that living on the river you take. But there are certainly some areas where we have that housing should not exist. Yeah.
I believe a national concept or a national program where a council could submit an application for a buyback scheme, for example, based off that sound planning and understanding of that area, I think would be a benefit. We certainly have some locations, Laura Court in Dirrigan springs to mind, where they experience sort of significant flooding, and the potential for buybacks in those sort of areas certainly could be a conversation that we'd like to have.
Yeah. Now, the Disaster Ready Fund, round one, it's $200 million a year, and then the second, we've just completed round two, and results of that will be handed down, I'm sure, by the Minister, Murray Watt, very soon. In round one, what did Townsville put in for, and what did you get precisely?
Unsure of the exact amount of submissions and what they were, but we were successful with one submission. It was a study on tide gates and tide valves, and basically that is a device on a stormwater system, and it allows inland flow to come out, but the flow from a river or a storm surge or a king tide or something like that to not back up into the system. So they're currently looking at a study to audit what we've currently got, and then also where do we need to put more devices. So that was a $75,000 co-funded from council and $75,000 from the Australian government. With regards to the round two, we've put forward 22 submissions to the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, and it was them. They would then vet all the decisions from Queensland, the submissions from Queensland, and apply that to NEMA. So unsure exactly of how many of those went to NEMA. On the back of Kirrily, a lot of our submissions, or our top priority submissions, were based around trying to shore up our water infrastructure network, our reservoirs, and the like, and trying to build that resilience and sustainable development within the city.
There's a number of programs that we're amalgamating into the Safer Local Roads and Infrastructure program. It's $200 million a year. That included, for example, the Heavy Vehicle and Productivity Safety program and the Bridges Renewal program. Have you, I just announced one last week in my electorate in a country road, a place called Perga School Road in Ipswich, which has got a one lane that cracks everywhere, and it's shocking. You could bridge weight-bearing restrictions on double Bs, etc. Is Townsville applying for those sorts of things? Because when floods affect rivers and roads and bridges, that's the sort of thing that you really need to be on as a local council.
I have no knowledge of council applying for that. Needless to say that they very well may have, but that hasn't come through my department. And again, something we can look at and provide some information.
I think that's a need for councils to do it. And certainly Somerset Council in South East Queensland, Ipswich has picked it up, but Somerset has been one of the best councils. Same with the Lockyer Valley and the Scenic Rim councils, all have been badly flood affected. Those councils in South East Queensland have done it. I'd encourage Townsville to think about that, taking that opportunity. It's really a betterment thing, you know, where you really say, I can replace bridges that have been badly affected, you know, a single lane bridge, wooden bridge with a, you know, a metal bridge that you can fold up and wash off and, you know, double laned, etc. That's an opportunity for Townsville. The new program is called Safer Local Road and Infrastructure Program. It's $200 million a year. It amalgamates and increases the funding. We've also increases, and I've asked this question to a number of councils. We're doubling the roads to recovery funding from $500 million a year to $1 billion a year. Are you in that, because you'll know, of course, we've announced it in the budget, are you looking at how you can improve your flood resilience through that extra funding you will receive? Is that a focus? Are you looking at that?
Again, I don't have that knowledge within
We'll
our
take that on
team,
notice
whether
and get
it's
back to
something may be happening through planning, but I know as a council, and especially through our emergency management team, and we are quite proactive in what we're trying to do in terms of mitigation measures, not only just for the individual and trying to be a resilient individual or a resilient household, but as a city as well.
Yeah.
And sort of there's nothing really off the table in terms of things that we could potentially look at in terms of citywide mitigation measures.
Okay, can I probably now concentrate on Councillor Robinson in terms of as a local elected official? One of the things that we've got as we've travelled around the countryside is the experience of local people who are flood affected, and you outlined thousands of homes. 91% of them were local businesses, and the rest were places like this and other places which were affected by the 2019 floods. The experience has been, of course, there's a general code of practice that the insurance industry reviews every few years and has to abide by, and 20 business days to notify, to tell someone about the progress of your claim, and a whole range of 4 months to complete the job, etc. Advice about we'll get back to you within 10 days, and advice about your rights to go to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. What's been the experience of your constituency? Obviously, you live on the river. You said that today. What's been the experience of your constituents going through that process? And they've talked to you about going through the internal review processes and then going to AVCA about that? What are they telling you?
Certainly. Look, thank you very much for that question, Shane. Fortunately, I've only been in the role of a councillor for 3 months now, 100-day mark. So I can't really comment as a councillor, but rather just purely as an individual.
As a candidate, we would talk to you about that.
It wasn't such a big thing at the time of the elections. But as I say, still as a resident of the city, I can offer you my thoughts from that. Yeah. The main problem I found from speaking to people who had been affected by the floods was that you are trying to get assessors to come in to assess, but the hardest part is then trying to get tradespeople. Townsville already currently has a shortage of tradespeople. And therefore, for these large events, generally you will get people coming from other regions to land here within Townsville to offer their services. Townsville at the moment, for example, only has less than 1% housing vacancy. So we have a shortage of housing already here in Townsville. When these floods or other natural disaster events occur, that housing stock is affected. Not only the available housing stock, but also it increases because of the fact that current people who are living in their houses may be unfit for being able to go back and continue to live in there. So therefore, these people that are coming from outside to offer their services need somewhere to live, need somewhere to stay, which then creates a problem. The other issue that you have is that sometimes these events are not isolated. So, for example, for Tropical Cyclone Kirrily, Cairns had suffered through Tropical Cyclone Jasper and Port Douglas and that region. And again, they are after tradies as well, and they don't have sufficient tradies within their local area to meet their own current demands. So therefore, people are coming in from outside. Nowhere for those tradies to stay. So therefore, they're not getting the number of tradies through to actually work on the projects that they're required to. The situation of, say, Tropical Cyclone Jasper is let's say a southern-based firm decide to offer their support. They come up. Obviously, there's additional cost to them coming up, which will then be passed on to the consumer or the insurer, which ultimately will have to be paid for by somebody. In the situation of, say, Kirrily, we were fortunate that it was only a minor cyclone and didn't affect many houses, because, again, we would be then in competition with the people of Port Douglas and Cairns for those same tradespeople, because we have insufficient tradespeople within town to be able to meet our own current needs. So that's probably where the biggest problem is that I would see is, number one, the housing shortage that we have, and number two, the labour shortage, the skilled labour shortage, which will often require people from outside to come into the community, and again, no housing, therefore it makes it very hard to house them for that period of time.
Now, I'm just got one more question. It's probably tangential to this inquiry, but it's certainly relevant to your disaster recovery issues and the council point of view. When the Ipswich Jets play the Townsville Blackhawks at the Defence Appreciation Day, they play, we play in blue, the Air Force blue, when you guys play in the green khaki, of the Army. And Ipswich is a garrison city like Townsville, only we've got the largest Air Force base in the country with a small Army component, and you're the exact opposite. Now, during floods, we see the application of the military to assist council, by the way, in the recovery. Was that your experience in 2019 and also in Kirrily? What's been the role to assist council here? And this has an impact on insurable assets as well. So I'm interested in and we're the federal government, So I'm interested to see, your perception of the application of the ADF to assist you.
Yep, certainly. If I could start off, and then I'll throw over to Zach to give you the more factual information. The first thing is, according to the policy, we should only be employing or requesting assistance from the Defence Forces through the Defence Assistance to the Civil Community, DAC tasking, once we have exhausted our own local resources or the situation is beyond our own capability. So that's the first thing. We are extremely fortunate that we have Defence personnel here in Townsville, and the way that Defence's through Defence Housing Authority have located their people is that they have now, rather than having enclaves, they have now dispersed them throughout the community. So in effect, Defence personnel are part of our community. They do make up a reasonably large portion of our community, either ex-Defence Service personnel or current serving personnel and their immediate families and the like. So it is extremely fortuitous for us to have that capability here. But again, we must go through that DAC process first before we can call upon them. I'll throw over to Zach now to give you the official response, however.
Thank you. So 2019, the Defence certainly played a key role in the recovery and the response here in Townsville. I was actually part of the Army at the time, and I was in a boat driving through an Oomba and a Dahlia, sort of doing assistance with rescues and that sort of stuff. So certainly a key role. Kirrily, Tropical Cyclone Kirrily, it wasn't necessarily needed. As you mentioned with Ipswich, having Defence within the city, we're very fortunate. As part of our local disaster management group, we have the Brigadier from the 3rd Brigade, Dave McCann, and we also have the SADFO from the RAF-based Luke Headley, who actually sit in our meetings. So not only are they sort of looking to offer their assistance, but they're also part of the community, and My personal sentiment and what we've been told is it would be very hard to tell the defence people of Townsville to not help when it's their homes and their partners and their families that have been affected as well. So whilst the federal government is moving away from the concept of defence helping with the natural disasters and focusing on their main role, within Townsville, it's I would see that very hard to stop them from doing that. There are other organisations who are coming in to try and fill that void with Disaster Relief Australia and some other ones like that. But yeah, I think our personal circumstances here in Townsville, Defence are going to want to help when able.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I just add
Yeah,
to that?
please.
So, part of the 2019 floods, the Defence did come out to the community and sandbag those affected communities right on the river there. So they were there before the major peak of that flood. And they also helped the community in extraction of those residents that were stranded. So they brought in vehicles and boats to remove people from those areas.
That's great. I just wanted to get that on the record, and we aren't actually. I mean, there's been some talk in relation to that. There's been some discussions in relation to those issues, and there are alternatives. But the application of the Defence Force in terms of evacuation and recovery is absolutely crucial. I'm strongly of the view that we need to do it, and Townsville and Ipswich are two classic examples of big regional cities where that's crucial.
I think, again, my personal opinion here, but Defence Force has a great capability to assist in there, and through the right appropriate channels, as we said, the DAC request, and if they're able to help, I think that's a good outcome for everyone.
Yeah, and to reduce the cost to the city, and to reduce, and we're talking about flood insurance affordability issues, you can't underestimate how if you can save things and protect things, it reduces the insurance costs to people.
Certainly. It's also a two-way street as well, in that if defence assets were also affected, egress to them or being able to access them, then that's where we would assist too. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. No, thank you. And thank you very much for your evidence today. There's a few questions that we've put on notice, and of course, please feel free to provide us with any additional information that you think might be relevant if that arises when you review today's hearings. And thanks also for all that you do for the community. It's been made very clear during these hearings that we've held how central local government is to helping communities in the immediate aftermath of natural disasters, but also in the weeks and months following, and I've certainly seen that in my own electorate. The committee secretariat will contact you in relation to any matters arising out of today's hearing. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. I now suspend proceedings for a short break, and we'll resume at 10:30. We'll resume proceedings. I thank and welcome representatives of Townsville Enterprise, the Townsville Chamber of Commerce and the Townsville Lot Owners Group. And I said this at the beginning of the day, but just want to reiterate that we're now in the phase of this inquiry where we're holding public hearings in regional and metro communities right across the country. We started out this inquiry with the insurers and the regulators, but it means a lot to us to be able to hear from communities directly affected and to take into account all the different ways in which communities are affected across the country. Before we proceed, I wish to advise that while the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, hearings are legal proceedings of the Australian Parliament, and the giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter which could be regarded as contempt of the Parliament. Before I ask each of you to make an opening statement, for the benefit of Hansard, could I please ask that each of you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And could I start on my left with Ms Turner?
Sorry.
Just your name.
Yeah,
and
Heidi
capacity in
Turner,
which you appear.
CEO, Townsville Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Claudia Broom-Smith, CEO of Townsville Enterprise.
Great.
Andrew Turner with the Townsville Lot Owners Group.
Great, thank you. Well, look, I'll start with Ms Turner, if you'd like to make an opening statement.
Yeah, so the Townsville Chamber's been advocating for reduced policies and costs for over a decade now. Mm-hmm. So the four key areas that we were focusing on are the reinsurance pool, which obviously is now coming into play, and we're starting to see some discounts come from that, around 20 to 40%. We're hearing reports, which is fantastic news. One of the other areas we looked at is ensuring that all insurers have to insure the whole country and not just the parts that are most profitable. The government provide a baseline of insurance so that everybody can afford a baseline cover of insurance. And the other one was removing tax off insurance as a essential service. We all need it to do work, to do business, to work here, to live here, and anywhere in the country. Obviously, to service our loans, we have to have insurance. And currently, we're being double taxed on a tax. We pay more in the north than anywhere else. So in the States, which means our premiums are higher. Last year, stamp duty on insurance alone in Queensland accounted for $1.4 billion, which is a phenomenal amount. If we look back to the focus of this, obviously, inquiry was around some of the challenges we've faced with the flood insurance. We haven't had any major events here since 2019. So looking back at that, there were delays in insurers' responses. There was confusion over what is determined and the definitions of what is a flood. I think there was 5 different definitions of water damage, what that could be, and if people were covered or not wasn't necessarily clear. Some of the small print really came into play then. Conflicting reports from hydrologists about where the water had actually come from, issues with council flood mapping and the definitions between councils and insurers, hygienists advising that tiles needed to be taken up, which was not part of the insurance cover, and then things like hotel rooms costing more because there was a blowout in time delays. And we saw back then that payments were made to the banks. The banks then paid out staged payments to builders as if it was a construction loan. In other areas of the world, we see that payment is made completely paid out to the policyholder. We see in other parts of the country buyback schemes like in Lismore for the worst impacted flooded properties, which as things progress with the market failure we have in insurance for the north, we may find that there'll be areas that are just completely uninsurable. So that's something there. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Not the most eloquent speech, but I think I've ticked off everything on my little list that I really wanted to deliver on. Yeah, so it's good to see that one of our recommendations come to play, the reinsurance pool. We're starting to see changes there. Some of the challenges may be around whether insurers are passing those discounts on to policyholders, and the ACCC doesn't have any legislative powers to ensure that happens. So as I'm aware of, there's nobody that actually has the power to ensure that insurers do pass on that discount they receive from the reinsurance pool. So that's a concern we would definitely have, and one of the areas we'd like to keep on top of. What we're starting to see with businesses is that with the market failure, with the policies increasing, we're seeing that businesses are removing unessential insurance cover. So things like where there might be machinery breakdown, they're taking that off and taking the risk because they're keeping the insurance they have to have to service their loans for major disasters. They're also increasing their excess, which again is a challenge because if windows get smashed by violence, then they're not covered, and that money to replace those comes straight off their bottom line. So there's a few different impacts of insurance. And that is everything I had on here right now.
No, thank you. And there'll be Q&A, so we'll be able to flesh out those issues.
So my first one.
Yeah, please.
Claudia Brooke-Smith, Townsville Enterprise. I guess Townsville Enterprise is here to secure the future of our region. So we look at the next 5 years, what will drive investment and population growth in the region. So insurance, particularly affordable insurance, is very key to the success of this region. And in past times, that has been something that has held us back in terms of access to insurance, but also the affordability of insurance, because we see businesses struggling to pay insurance, but also we see residents unable to afford insurance or getting access to insurance. What that means is the general growth and economic stimulus here in the region will suffer, because ultimately we cannot afford housing or we cannot build new houses because there is no insurance. Businesses can't continue their operations in the way they want because they feel like it's not a safe place to do business. So I think it is a very important part of the living in the north, insurance affordability, and we thank the inquiry for coming to Townsville today to hear us three out as well. So it has been a strong point of contention for the region and is one of the most commonly cited inhibitors for growth, and I think that is something that that we want the inquiry to really take away from this visit here in Townsville. The national access for insurance is a standard that we expect in the first world country like ourselves, and we're finding it very, very difficult sometimes to access insurance in North Queensland. Recent surveys just before the cyclones have showed that 30% of our businesses are either underinsured or not insured at all for natural disasters, which is a big risk, as Heidi mentioned before, not only for rebuilding and then regaining confidence in the region, but also, that is also getting out to the community that I can't afford insurance, so I'm not paying, and therefore more people are doing it. So it's a snowball effect, I guess. 2019 was the last major flooding event. It was one in a 500-year flooding event that resulted in over 30,000 claims and received $1.27 billion in value loss. So it's a massive impact, not only on the insurance industry, but also on people that are uninsured and obviously for government. We already talked about the insurance pools. We're still seeing, there are people coming online with the insurance pool, and we hope to see more reduction in those, and Townsville Enterprise, together with the Chamber, has advocated around the reinsurance, but we understand that's not part of this hearing, but we just wanted to mention it. Townsville is in an absolute housing crisis, less than 1% of available stock in this region, and an investment pipeline of $33 billion that will require 20,000 new residents in the next 6 years having to move here. Housing shortages facing North Queensland has heightened the importance of access to affordable insurance, and in particular strata insurance, which I'm sure Andrew will touch on in more detail, and to provide competitive pricing for customers to get actually insurance cover. Access to affordable strata insurance continues to be a major barrier for growth in the region, especially when we are seeking the change from building individual house to large-scale developments, which have, at the moment, $250,000 worth of insurance attached to them, which is really uneconomically, and will mean that a housing shortage will increase in North Queensland. For this committee, we have several recommendations. One, mitigation. That is really key to build resilience in the region. Resilience infrastructure could capture investments such as further dam construction, floodwater diversion channels, and improvement management of waterways. We found that's really important from the 2019 floods. Obviously, the dam was a key concern for council and for the residents close by the river system all the way through town. Townsville Enterprise also recommends that the federal government develops natural hazard risk maps that are able to provide insights and prioritise regions most in need for resilience infrastructure investment. This should be informed by data made available from the local government agencies and the private sector, including the insurance industry. Second recommendation is introduction of subsidies and improvement of resilience for private dwellings. So we talked about affordability and how that is really key to get people not insure, but to insure. We recommend that residents and small business should be eligible for subsidies to undertake improvements and mitigation, such as the installation of flood resilient design and materials into homes and businesses. We also recommend that the federal government and state government look to extend the investment into these programs and broaden the scope of the grants to include other natural hazard events, including cyclone, storm, and bushfire events. The third recommendation is improvements upon existing land use planning and building codes. In order to minimise the risk associated for insurers, it is imperative that zoning authorised sees the development of unsuitable buildings in unsuitable locations. And, our local government will need help with that. The fourth recommendation is the removal of unfair taxes and charges from insurance policies. So our recommendation for the federal government to consider is the affordability pressures associated with insurance and the role of tax reforms in alleviating these pressures. The support of the federal government to progress the reform agenda and to work with state and territory governments to adopt a timeable of those changes. To address the affordability issues, Townsville Enterprise proposed the removal and cash refund for stamp duty paid by taxpayers in high natural hazard risk zones like North Queensland and in low income brackets as well. And then the last recommendation is to work with local government. We know increasing resilience decreases natural hazard risk, which helps to address insurance affordability, but this task is too large for small regional councils, not only for their balance sheets, but also from a planning and implementation point of view. Support for local governments can also be provided by data sharing, transparency around natural hazard risks associated with the LGAs, and just generally working together on building codes and building approvals. So I think they're the four recommendations we're bringing to the committee today.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
You're ready? Thank you. Actually, just before I start, Heidi made a fantastic submission to to Federal Treasury for the budget review with regards to insurance in North Australia. It was a rip of paper. It really explains the purpose of insurance in our community. For Claudia, I disagree with her stamp duty argument, but I will talk to you on that later. I don't think we should remove it. But to move ahead, thank you for coming to Townsville. I think you learn a lot, we can share a lot. The Queensland strata economy is $216 billion, some insured value. There's 52,000 buildings in Queensland, there's strata buildings, it houses 1 million residents. It's operated by 150,000 volunteers, mostly aged and unskilled. This is an economic consequence. 1 in 5 homes in Queensland is a strata home. And I think if you dig deeper, 1 in 10 homes in Australia is a strata home. It's a massive community that our regulators don't observe. Townsville, North Queensland and North Australia do have an insurance affordability crisis. There's been a lot of noise about it and I will demonstrate why now. Townsville Lot Owners Group advocate the affordability predicament, facts and figures to our state and federal MPs. And I think Shane might have received a few emails from us in days gone by, but many we've sent out to our politicians. We're trying to improve the conversation and argument of how bad insurance is in North Australia. Townsville Lot Owners Group believe the $30 billion North Australian strata insurance crisis is a state and federal Treasury regulatory failure, as they did not detect the crisis coming. They were using the wrong insurance data sets and did not scrutinise all the climate disaster proclamations and exaggerations and errors. They never tested it, they never fact-checked. Townsville Owners Group believe because of our Treasury regulators could not detect the crisis, means they could not forewarn our members of Parliament, state and federal, that the crisis is here and it is severely damaging the property economy of North Australia. So you guys weren't forewarned, because our regulators did not know it was coming. Today, our MPs here, I gather, you have a home, I gather, and I bet you have home insurance. Mm-hmm. Question, how do you know you have affordable insurance? Do you want to know? Because I can help you with that, to test your own insurance if it's affordable. Did you read your 100+ pages of insurance policy? Did you understand it? That's the biggest issue. To move on, we have 4 requests. The Australian property insurance market survives on the dubious General Insurance Code of Practice, which forms trust contracts between the insurer and the insured. Sadly, insurance breach complaints have skyrocketed to some 40% over last year, sitting at 54,000 complaints registered by the Governance Committee of the Insurance Industry, and 30% the year before. It's not working. National property insurance premium prices have increased some 35% nationally in the last 4 years, ABS reported. And for many North Australian strata buildings, recently we have proved that there's a 200% climate loading on North Queensland, North Australian properties above what the rest of Australia are subjected to. So our claim, we want 4 bits of help from government. Our first claim is insurance media, that the insurance industry currently release much incorrect data into the public arena in order to justify premium prices increases. There's so much media about disaster, pay more. Townsville Owner Group requests that the agencies such as the Australian Climate Service, the ACS, be engaged to fact check and verify all information put into the public arena by the insurance industry. This conditioning material should be checked. Insurance visibility, claim 2, that our federal and state insurance regulators have no federal electorate or state electorate or local government area property insurance premium and claims performance visibility. Doesn't exist. We've asked, they've apologised, but they don't have it. APRA and the ACCC. Townsville Owner Group want the government legislation repairs to empower Treasury regulators to deliver high visibility property insurance performance statistics with postcode granular resolution for all insurance products, product premium sales and claims, GST and stamp duty to be included. The third, the insurance responsibility. Currently, the insurance industry suffer, and I have evidence here, many financial penalties for market trust infringements as detected by government. So ASIC are doing their job to a degree, ACCC are detecting bad behaviour. But the insurance industry, we believe, treat it as a badge of honour because they just keep getting more and more penalties. Townsville Owner Group wishes to see an added emphasis be placed on personal breaches of directors' duties and responsibilities, such as having board members or CEOs forced to step down from their role in addition to current financial penalties. That will solve the Hayne crisis for cultural issues in these insurance industry. And the last one there, mutual climate risk mitigation. Currently, the insurance industry of Australia holds some 12.9 million granular property street address specific insurance PIF details that have never been verified with the property owner. So they have all this data about us, but they won't tell us what they've got. Townsville Owner Group want the federal and state taxpayer billion-dollar funded HIP, DRF, the Hazard Insurance Partnership, the Disaster Ready Fund, resilience mitigation programs that reduce the insurer's climate risk exposure. We want them to negotiate that all insured PIF data be disclosed to the property insured for validation, for education and for mitigation, because they're not sharing the data they have on us. With that, I think I'll put my energy into it. Thank you.
No. Thanks all. So look, I'll start with some questions. and then I'll hand over to Mr. Newman, and may have questions from other members online as well. Look, I think you raised a lot of big issues, so I'll step through some of them. Look, the reinsurance pool, Mr. Newman has been dealing with that with other witnesses, so I'll leave that for him to deal with you. Look, I wanted to start with this issue of access and affordability, and I mean, one of the broad trends there is that I think that over the last 10 to 20 years, it's clear that the industry has been using more and more granular data, and so that has led to some residences and small businesses being exposed to very significant shifts in their premiums. But I think you've all touched on this, but Mr. Turner, at the end, you talked about some of the issues around the data in the system. And for me, one of the issues at the moment is that we have a system where the insurers have been generating incredibly detailed and granular data over the last 10 to 20 years, in part relying on local government flood modelling, but moving beyond that. And I think you're right, the people with the least data in our ecosystem at the minute are householders and small businesses. So I think your point about the ACS and fact-checking is a really interesting one. And also your fourth recommendation around the HIP, getting access to some of that household-level data. I don't think it's yet gone as far as you would have recommended, but can I just say the HIP is already moving towards the industry sharing data with the federal government in a way that hasn't happened in the past, and I think part of that is a quid pro quo for the fact that the federal government is now leaning in on the mitigation funding side of things. But I do agree with you. I think that the data sharing is, for me, like a central part of where we need to move to going forward. I think households and small businesses ultimately need much more data about their own risks. I mean, one thing I was just going to put out there is that an idea that has been flagged with the committee is that for both households and small business, there be a requirement that insurers break down the composition of premiums to different perils and say stamp duty and admin costs, so that there's a lot more transparency. Now that then begs the question of fact-checking some of the components, but at the very least that would give consumers more transparency. If their premium goes up by 30%, like, is it all due to a reassessment of flood risk, or is it due to a rise across the board? What do you think about that kind of step? Not a solution, but just a part of what might help.
Would you like to comment first before I get stuck?
Yeah.
Well, around mitigation, that's not an area that we've been advocating for because premiums are too high right now, and mitigation of any sort will not reduce the premiums within the next 4 years. That's something that's been indicated to us by the Insurance Council. So with that in mind, things like having it defined by postcode right now, like, it's just not actually being passed on as a discount to premiums, which is a challenge. But it's also been indicated to us that one of the largest perils of insurance claims is flexi piping behind your fridge. You know, this isn't a natural disaster, and this is a nationally claims, the highest claims are for damage caused by flexi pipe behind washing machines. So it's a building code rather than a natural disaster.
They call it a working claim, that.
Yeah.
Not
No,
natural.
but sorry, would you support, though, insurers being required to break down on a premium what the components
absolutely,
are?
sorry, absolutely.
I think that would be helpful because also it gives an idea of what is taxes on top of, you know, so the common person understands actually how much is the insurance part versus what are the accelerated, you know, on top costs. I think everything in terms of transparency of data or invoicing would be helpful for the general public to understand, and business owners, because they may want to make also a decision when they are split up, which part of the insurance they are wanting to keep or not wanting to keep is the other option.
But I guess reducing cover based on that is, you know, we shouldn't be in a situation where we have to reduce cover to make it affordable. Like this, because the costs have increased to such a significant amount that, you know, we end up with, you know, it's not fair that we in this part of the world have to reduce our cover because
I think it's generally as you have building blocks in, you know, your I guess, insurance in general. You can choose. I'm not saying you're not getting insured. I'm saying, is there ways that you can find ways, like you do for your household goods, the stuff that you found quite important or valuable, you definitely want covered, like floods, but you might be on a hill and you might not want to be covered for, you know, sea level rising or whatever. I don't know.
Totally makes sense.
I think we need to I think transparency and splitting it up and giving transparency of what we're actually getting is a good thing.
But I guess what might be helpful in that breakdown as well is if there are specific areas for that property that would reduce. So if you did this, we would reduce your premiums next year by this. That information would be particular.
Yeah, and just before I turn, so on that issue, so we've already done that, government in conjunction with some insurers on bushfires. And so there's a bushfire app now where basically there are particular household level mitigation strategies which are proposed to people, and that if a household undertakes a particular mitigation strategy, they will then get a reduction in their premium. I think another idea, in addition to the transparency idea, is that we extend that to floods so that households have particular strategies suggested to them, but also that if they undertake mitigation at the household level, they actually get the reduction in the premium.
And that definition of flood.
So I'll get onto that in a minute.
Perfect.
But Mr. Turner.
So with regards to insurance affordability, it's quite mixed actually. Insurance affordability, strata insurance is quite complex, and actually to use a pun, I'd put strata insurance as well above this in flood inquiry. We're well up there, so our flood consequences are low. But strata insurance is very complex because the legislation, compulsory by state, not by federal, is that we have to have 3 products. But all our insurers sell us 10 products, 3 compulsory, merged, commingled with another 8 junk products that some don't have any use whatsoever, which the Hayne inquiry said was unconscionable. We are pushing so hard, but in North Australia there you ask insurer, can you break down the 10 policies that we're buying? I have one for public liability. Can I have one for the common property? Can I have one for the building? Oh, no, can do. So we get pushed back. We can't ask our body corporate managers to do it because they're reimbursed and rewarded by the insurance industry. We can't ask our broker to do it because they will not go to market. They'll only go to their mates, and we have much evidence on that. Moving forward with mitigation, there was mitigation coming through from the DRF fund, or the $40 million, now $60 million strata resilience program. So there's $40 million there to apply for, $150,000 per building. We asked our strata insurer, what should we mitigate for? They said, we can't tell you. We said, well, if we spend it on doors, but you said we should have spent it on the roof, we can spend $20, $30, $50, $100,000 on roof repair, on door repair, but you say, no, it should have been windows, so you're not getting any discount. So they refused to join the conversation. This is CHU QBE. They do not want to join. Under the new strata mitigation program coming out, you have to have a James Cook University certificate now to get into it, which is fair. It's a good practice there. We hope. Hopefully down the track we see that the insurers do, because they can stand back and say, well, we're not giving you premium relief because you did this or did that. They're not joining the conversation whatsoever to say, hey, if you spend $20,000, the government gives you $40,000 or $100,000, 3 for $1. If you give us this much money, your premium will come down by this. They're not doing that. They're standing right back.
So you'd support mechanisms where, if there was mitigation, that it linked directly to premiums and that be part of the...
But it's gone past there now. Yesterday I had a pensioner in tears at my door waving a CHU, welcome to my door and telling little stories, waving a RACQ saying, hey, because the ARPC's up and running and you put your $11,000 roofing program funded by the federal state governments there, well, we're recalling all our credits and discounts we gave you. You're going back to full policy level. So you're going from this little house from $5 back to $8,000. And that means the insurance company here in this example, RACQ, are not honouring all the mitigation spending by government. That's a sad fact. And there'll be many more of these letters coming out now, because this is one of those chain letters. So we don't believe that the insurance company industry is beholden to mitigation because they're silent. And to use a word used by a previous president of the Chamber of Commerce in this town, in the media said many times, and I do agree with him, mitigation from the insurance industry is a hoax. They use it to scare us. They tell us everything else can solve the problem, but they don't join the conversation or saying, well, we'll give you a discount. So we still believe it is a hoax. We think government's funding it, but the insurance company's not joining.
No, look, that's very important feedback. I mean, just we're really trying to think of mechanisms where we can try and link it better. And I think in bushfires, there's been some progress, but I agree with you. It's a complex area. Now, just in terms, again, another question on transparency. Mr. Turner, you pointed to the fact that the number of code breaches expanded dramatically, particularly after 2022, where there were those 300,000 claims. Now, some of those breaches were, just the sheer volume of claims, particularly with Cat 221, and, some of them were somewhat minor and technical, some of them were bad. But one recommendation in relation to the way the Code Governance Committee operates, which has been put to us, is that a simple step which might improve the effectiveness of the reporting of those breaches is that rather than reporting breaches by clause in the aggregate, we should be reporting breaches by clause by company, and that would, not solve everything again immediately, but it would lead to the risk of some reputational harm. So would that be one change that you think would potentially be worth exploring?
To bring further light to that $54,000 complaints registered by the Governance Committee there, the Governance Committee only influence, under the code, they only influence 38 code subscribers, Suncorp, RACQ being a pair of them. But the APRA tell us that they've got 78 general insurance companies on their books. So that means roughly 50% aren't even in the 54,000 complaints, which in my mind expands and can be factored up. We've got over 100,000 complaints out there with ease because the whole industry is not being tested. So we need a different complaint shop.
Now, I wanted to switch to a couple of questions on access to insurance, and then this kind of affordability access are often two sides of the same coin, because if sometimes individuals or small businesses are told we're not going to insure you, but sometimes they'll say we're willing to insure you, but your premium's now 20 times what it was, so which is in effect saying we don't want to insure you. But look, obviously we need, I think, over time to move towards a system where we think about ways in which to provide people with meaningful insurance. But in the interim, and this is an issue for small business in particular, but it might also be relevant to strata. One issue that's been raised, particularly in regional cities which are now considered very high risk, so this came up in Lismore, but it also came up yesterday a bit in Cairns, is that there are large parts of regional CBDs where basically insurers are saying we just don't want to cover anybody. There are some small businesses which said to us, look, we would rather a more flexible arrangement where it might be, for example, that with very serious floods, we might need to kind of self-insure a bit to an extent, where we reconfigure our arrangements so that we have flood-resistant flooring, where we set up our business so that we can clean it out quickly, where we protect some of our electrical equipment. And some of the small businesses said, we understand insurers may not want to provide cover for that, but we might, for example, want cover for cash flow issues for a couple of months or a month while we deal with all of that and then get back up and running. So what do you think about this broad issue of the fact that sometimes what the industry offers small business is one size fits all, and that the industry should think about more flexible arrangements, particularly for businesses in very high risk areas?
On property with small business, most small businesses in our membership rent, they don't own. So that's a separate issue around the insurance cost. They're bearing the brunt of it, but it's not them that's insured. So, for example, there's shopping centres that have got the cover, so therefore the reinsurance pool they don't fit within that because it's over 10 million, for example. So the small business side of things, it's a complex challenge which we should definitely look to delve deeper into. But just have more transparency.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, you see this happening in low-lying areas that have experienced lots of floods over several, decades. Like here, Palmer Street would be one, where businesses are, building either up or building in a way that they can wash out the floors easily. So necessity has driven that behaviour already in some extent. We're also seeing, yes, people are choosing to cover for certain things or not cover for certain things that they either can't afford, but that they can't afford or they don't have the need for. However, these flooding events or hazard events are becoming more frequent. So the flooding, sea level rises around Palmer Street, which is on the river. These events become more frequent. So how do we long term, short term, they made their living easier by washing things out and being able to react quickly or sandbag quickly for cyclones. But long term, as water rises by a metre, they will not be able to do that for the safety of their houses. So I think mitigation does play a role in long term, looking at how do you just like in Europe when you have flood proofing mitigation infrastructure that will help to protect those businesses long term. But that is a big investment and it's a big planning and building code requirement that needs to be implemented by state and federal government, helping local government to deliver those infrastructures. So I think they're doing that because they have to, but I think long term what we need is the mitigation to feed into the safety of those buildings, like in low-lying areas. And we have plenty of them, Palarenda, Palmer Street, South Townsville, which is huge in terms of the population that lives there. And they're, making big investments in housing there. So really, how do we protect them ongoing is what we need to make sure, and mitigation is still an important way forward, and if you look long term.
Well, a good example of that is South Townsville, for example, after Yassi, so 2011, the waters came through. It was like up to my waist walking into our yard. Yeah. My house is high, thank goodness. But anyway, after Yassi, the council ripped up all the roads and put drains basically across the whole road. So now we don't even get any floods when there's a high tide, super high tide, right? So it's mitigation long term, but that's not necessarily impacting on our premiums.
Yes, that's the challenge.
So that's what I'm saying about those areas. Yes, it's low lying, but actually they're extra.
We don't want premiums always being affected on the upside and being
absolutely
on the downside.
Yeah.
Mr. Turner?
The buried answer here, the small business and home most property insurance is optional. You have to take it, it's too expensive. Strata insurance, you've got to take it, you've got no choice, it's enforced. The Townsville here for insurance there, if the price is too much, people drop out, but we asked our ACCC how many, and Claudia helped me, we asked the ACCC how many insured buildings in Australia, in Queensland, in Townsville, insured and uninsured. No can help, we don't have that data. Yeah. No one does. That's a shameful statistic, KPI for economic development of this country. What we come back to is the meaningful insurance. I love the word you use there because that's what it should be, meaningful insurance, not a profit product or whatever. So we have the general insurance industry, and that basically we believe it's most properties are over-insured because we know that every strata building in Australia has to be insured full value replacement, but we know in Queensland there's been no full value replacement claim since 1997. What we would like is for legislation to open up the gate to let mutuals come in. That means the mutual insurance will come in. Townsville City Council has mutual, the Cowboys Football Club has mutual, and the Anglican Church has mutual because they went off general insurance because they could not get meaningful insurance for their $120 million worth of buildings in North Australia. They were getting ripped off terribly, prayed to God, went off grid for a year and came back with a mutual. The mutual offers a much better option because if all strata buildings and possibly many other buildings went out to tender for insurance, the tender market, I've worked within engineering and many other places, but if all body corporates and many other businesses put their insurance out for tender, I think you'd solve your inner city crisis. And if you allowed the mutuals to compete, the general insurance industry would probably shake and rattle because what happens when you do a claim in the general insurance industry, the liability is agreed on the price, so you're going to get paid out no matter what. Whereas on a mutual, it's a discussion. It's a discretion of how much they pay you. But the beauty of it is, like coming back to the floods in Townsville, JCU told me recently, the high tide flood marks of Townsville are 19 1946 and 2019. They're many, many years apart. So what happens is the frequency is being abused by the insurers because we believe they're creating all these artificial flood scares, etc. If you come back to other national reports, there's only been 52 massive floods in this country. There's been more bushfires, more drought. So coming back to the statistics, in a mutual, you have a claim, they'll say, well, let's talk about it. It's actually reviewed, it's not just paid out by phantom type excesses. So mutuals, it's actually a discussion to get paid out. A mutual, I believe the mutual industry of insurers could compete in the tender industry for insurance.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting idea.
That's on borders, just onto self-insurance.
Yeah. And look, just as an aside, we had a major inquiry into competition last year, and one of the issues we looked at was the role of mutuals in the financial services sector as a source for additional competition. So it's an interesting idea. Look, can I just, before I hand over to Mr. Newman, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions on standard terms. This has come up quite a bit. So following the 2011 floods, the term flood was standardised in legislation, but I think what's arisen is complication because the other forms of water damage are not standardised. So rainwater runoff, tidal inflows, whatever it might be, and there are so many other terms. So there's a process underway at the moment where the government is looking at whether or not we should standardise the other terms, and one option, or the strongest option, would be legislation. I take it you'd be supportive of standardising other terms that are used just for to reduce confusion, not remove confusion, but to reduce confusion amongst consumers.
From our perspective, reducing confusion around not just what your policy coverage is, but actually be able to compare policies from different providers is essential to then look at what your options are, not be frightened that you're missing something somewhere else.
I think making it easy for the consumer.
I mean, the difficulty is, even if we have, and I look, we'll see where the committee gets to, but to me personally, it does seem like it's a sensible step. It doesn't seem to add competitive tension to have different meanings of the same term. Like, I don't think any consumers would choose between policies based on that. But even if we standardise what the terms mean, it's not in a sense going to get us away from these debates around a particular fact situation and whether something was a flood or rainwater runoff. And we've heard in many different communities endless discussions around whether the water ran down the hill before the river broke its banks. And so we're still not going to get away from these disputes, even if the terms are standardised. There's two suggestions that have been put forward I just wanted to test your thinking on. One is that hydrologists are expensive, so they're almost always commissioned by the insurer, and there's an argument that inherently leads to at least a perception of some bias, notwithstanding the fact that hydrologists are professionals who work to high standards. But there's an argument that it might be a better model if we had some kind of fund, but maybe jointly funded by government and the industry, where they were independently procured through a panel and then could be used in disputes in a way where it's more even-handed, at least in terms of the optics. And the second suggestion that's been put forward is that because there's such a shortage of hydrologists, that we should move towards more of a model where there's a joint report for a series of properties, maybe a bunch of businesses in a high street or a bunch of residences in a street where there's, broadly speaking, a similar experience, and maybe that report would then make reference to exceptional circumstances. It might be that the street or the business right at the end had particular water flow issues, but that we need to then move towards more of a joint reporting approach. The difficulty there is that you might have multiple insurers involved, but it would be one way of dealing with the shortage of hydrologists, which in some instances seems to lead to long delays. So just wanted to put those two ideas out there.
Yeah, I mean, anything to reduce that confusion of different hydrologists, particularly talking to challenges, but and that transparency around their decisions and their reports being independent, I think that's advisable, definitely be good.
Yep, right.
The affordability, we keep coming back to affordability, and you're focusing really on the flood aspect of it, and I don't believe the flood aspect is as big as what we've seen. 1967 was Australia's worst worst ever climate year for disaster, some normalised up now at $16 billion in 1 year. And they're the scary numbers that get pumped out there. But we come across to look at the ACCC. They did some work between 2017 and 2019 and looked at all the claims histories of this country, but they looked across what they call the climate insurance claims and the working insurance claims. I can report that they detected there was $1.8 billion spent on insurance claims for cyclone damage between 2008 and 2018. At the same time, there was $2.8 billion on theft in strata buildings, not even climate related, so it's a working claim. And there was another $2.4 billion that they couldn't account for from the insurers that were submitted to the ACCC that they said that this is unclassified. So of the $36 billion for that decade, they can't account for half of it. And it's not all climate. So what's happening is the insurance premiums are bashing up, especially in North Australia there. We're getting hit with all the climate loadings, yet there's more risks and other risks further south that they all live comfortably in that range of premium. And what we find is North Australia, we're paying so much. How do we know we're paying so much? I said earlier to you that I could work out your house affordability. Take your property, its insured value, divided by 1,000. It's the rule of thumb for all of Australia, below Rockhampton. So a $20 million building in Townsville, 39 apartments, 40 apartments there, will probably cost you $20,000 in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and I've checked. I've got friends, we've gone out and sampled, so we've got lots of data. We have lots of data. We've got over, just coming up to 300 tax invoices.
Yeah.
More than the ACCC have. We have actual data from customers. For Queensland, that same building, for a $20 million building, we've been up to $20 million. For $20 million, we went up to 200,000 and more. It's coming back a little bit. We think the ARPC is starting to kick in, only in some shops around town, selectively. So just coming back to the affordability, comes back to the climate, comes back to flood. The insurers will use any toy box. Coming back to hydrologists, I think that's a smoke screen. I really do. I think they're distracting the conversation about what is the risk. They should be able to put in your policy what are the risks and what change. Because we all know the prices are changing, but we keep asking insurance companies, what risks change? Because Mother Nature has delivered Queensland a flood every 25 years and a cyclone every probably 5 or 6 years. So we don't know what risks have changed. And they don't tell us what risks have changed. They want us to assume.
So just to go back to the fundamentals, you're after more transparency of what's building up to the premium, but also more regulatory fact-checking of it.
Exactly. The transparency is the big issue there, because they have a commingled bill, 10 policies all put into one, 3 are compulsory. The other, if you don't buy the whole policy, you can't get those 3 insured. So it's just vague and evasive. It's not in line with their code of conduct or their code of practice.
Okay. No, thanks for that. Look, I'll hand over to Mr. Newman.
Okay. Thanks very much to all of you. In summary for today, I thought I'd just have a bit of a look at the Insurance Council of Australia's submission to this inquiry, submission number 11. And I'm going to put a few propositions to you and get your response in relation to it. And the Insurance Council's submission to us seems to be as follows. I can summarise this and then I'll put it to you and I'll ask you to respond to it. First up, it's the fault. The problem we've got in Australian insurance is the fault of local governments to go back to colonial times, because people live in areas that get flooded. Okay? Secondly, it's the fault of state governments because they put on, and I quote, unfair taxes on us. Okay? Thirdly, it's the fault of the federal government and all levels of government, because we've been saying, this is the Insurance Council of Australia, we've been making submissions to governments on inquiries for years and you won't listen to us. And finally, that financial protection against floods is insurance provides financial protection against floods, but it's not a solution to flood risk. It's all the government's fault because they haven't done what they need to do. And I don't think that's an unfair summation of submission 11 to this inquiry by the Insurance Council of Australia. And I've been critical, and I've raised this with various insurance companies throughout this inquiry, saying your peak body has let you down badly in the way you've handled this submissions to this inquiry. What do you say to that to the Insurance Council of Australia?
that's a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Where to start?
I had a quick look at their report because your website is so good for the inquiry. You've got all the submissions there already. And their report tells us there's 15,000 properties in Australia there, 15 million and 10 million are not in flood affected. There's about 3 million, they don't know their classification at this stage. But they come through, again on flood insurance. I come back to my strata world because the insurance industry's got too many rabbit holes. You would have discovered that. But back under the Act for Queensland, the State Government Act for body corporates is we have. And I go back one further. The Insurance Contract Act 1984 has some 32 standard terms and conditions for insurance policy, for a standard policy. The Queensland strata one has been reduced down to 10. Flood's not even in there, nor cyclone, of the 10 damage events that you must insure against. So the insurance companies have taken those 10 and said, well, you've got to have flood, you've got to have cyclone, and we have no say in it. And it's against the Act, but the supply chain just says you have to have it, and the supply chain is very long from insurer to broker to body corporate manager down to the insurer, down to the committee. So going all the way back, the flood is not compulsory for strata, but it's forced upon us by the insurers under the guise that we're going to have massive floods. Another thing about strata is we do know from the Yazi and from Cyclone Yazi, Cyclone Debbie, that of the all the $4 billion worth of cyclone claims for the decade of 2008-2018, $4 billion for all housing in Queensland, only 131 million was affected by strata, so less than 3%. So strata buildings are the safest natural disaster building model in this country, with evidence. And you know, naturally, you can see in a flood, only one level gets wet, maybe two, but not the rest. But it's still inhabitable during the flood. So that's all got to be rethought, and I think the insurance company did a terrible report that they submitted, but I'm glad you're going to fact check.
So basically what you're saying, Mr Turner, is in fact, if I can summarise what the Insurance Council of Australia is saying to us and to the Australian public is that the Australian public should socialise its losses and they should capitalise their profits. That's effectively what they're saying. That we should all pay for this, but we should make insurance so they can be more profitable. It's interesting because you referred to me. I was around when Graham Perrott led that inquiry into insurance industry issues up here in 2011. After that, and what was so interesting is this issue was around for decades before that. But what is so clear, if you look at that report, and at the beginning of that report that Graham Perrott led in the House of Representatives Committee, in that particular area where there was fires in 2J and there was floods in Queensland all over the place, the insurance industry made billions of dollars worth of profits in that year. Billions. It was huge amounts of profit. That was the time of great natural disasters around the country, from Western Australia to Queensland to elsewhere.
Same now.
It's the same now.
2021,
So we will discover in the next few years just how much profit was being made by the insurance industry, at a time of great disaster, when Lismore and Ipswich and Brisbane, in the floods up here in 2019. Kirrily and all that sort of stuff. We'll discover the next few years, but they would have us believe that that we need to pay for all their costs. Now that's a good thing for us to be flood resilient and to do mitigation projects and disaster ready. And we asked questions this morning of your council up here about what they're doing, and they are putting in application for the disaster ready fund. And it's a good thing that we should make our homes resilient. Now, I'm interested in, I think you said, Ms. Bromsmith, you said about, and I've been pushing this through this inquiry, the idea that Resilient Homes program was a one-off $741 million project for only parts of Queensland, excluding Townsville, by the way. It was southwest and central Queensland, but Townsville was excluded. Anything north of central Queensland was excluded. What do you say about rolling out that program on a recurrent basis? And it be a permanent thing in a cooperative relationship between the federal and state government?
I think that's That's exactly what we want to see, because we want to see long-term mitigation, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to see reducement of a more affordable insurance, because less events, less damage will mean, hopefully, not that they're pocketing the profit, but that they're actually reducing the insurance costs. So I think that program would be extraordinarily great to see for our councillors and our own people. So we think councillors need support, but we also need to see small businesses and homeowners getting support as well to implement the right things. But we'd also, as we said before, what makes the difference to reduce the fees? So, by doing all of that, by rolling out that fund, how do we hold everyone accountable to then actually reduce the fees for the people and the businesses?
Which is the whole focus of the whole thing, reducing the cost of premiums long term, right? So, sorry.
No. I mean, that's by implementing those resilient programs, which is the right thing to do, how does that benefit not the insurance company, but the actual pay?
One of the things, Julia Gillard in February 2013 in Ipswich, in Caxton Espresso Cafe in Ipswich, announced the National Insurance Affordability Initiative, which Abbott got in and abolished straight away. He got in and abolished it immediately. And it was, for example, $10 million of flood resilient programs across Ipswich, the raising of dams in Western Sydney and elsewhere, and it was the start of a national insurance affordability initiative. Wayne Swan was the Treasurer, Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister. This was the beginning. Bill Shorten was instrumental in this, and I was pushing very hard to do it because he was in charge of insurance. I think, Daniel, you were working at the time for Bill.
I was the advisor back then.
So you and I had better skin in the game back then, brother. But that was linked.
Yeah.
An agreement with the insurance industry that this would happen.
Yeah.
And Abbott, stupidly, under his commission of audit, got rid of it. Okay. So I think that I think what we need is a constructive, cooperative relationship, an agreement with government and business and the insurance industry that if we do certain things, the premium benefit must flow. Must flow. Okay, that's got to happen. There's got to be an agreement. It cannot be that government will do this and we may agree.
Yeah.
Because I think what Mr. Turner's spot on about the transparency and accountability. I think that's absolutely spot on.
If I may add to value, the government has been busy. The QRA, Queensland Reconstruction Authority, have done a fantastic job. They sent me their data the other day. Yeah, Andrew, chew on this. I did. 119 disasters in Queensland have been serviced by the NDRA funding, federal and state funding, to repair communities at LGA level resolution. Of those 119, guess where the number one shire in Queensland has received the most, not funding, but the most funding event actions? Would be the Shire of Cook.
Okay.
The second is the Shire of Carpentaria. The third is the Shire of Barcoo. For those on the 39 of the $741 billion where all the floods are happening. So what happens is, I don't think there's good connection between government and regulators and this Queensland Reconstruction are really getting their act together. Second part, North Australia pay much more premiums and higher premiums than the rest of them. Here's an example. Cyclone in the north, $100 million, Cyclone Oswald. Brisbane gets flooded, $1.1 billion, but the whole flood...
For Hansard, Mr. Turner's pointing to Carpentaria way up in the north, aren't you? And he's pointing to
South East Queensland. They got the flood impact of Oswald. What happens is then the premium, the scorecard comes out, disaster in Queensland, another cyclone, $1.2 billion, 1.1 for Brisbane, and one, but it's all invoiced on, all placed on North Queensland and on our premiums. So that's the very unfair part. Coming back to visibility of, if you imagine every shire, every postcode, we knew how much insurance was paid by that shire, by that postcode, and how many claims came back, and you populated that like Townsville, 4810 for a decade, you'd see, hey, all this money's gone out, not much claims have come in, a little bit of traffic, and then a disaster event comes in, and you plonk it on top and you say, well, actually, that's only a portion of the event, because all the claims are in postcode 4065 in Milton, in Brisbane, and it's all claimed on North Queensland to pay for. So what happens is we have no resolution, and we need to have it at postcode. The second part there, coming back to fake news. We have a minister here called the Minister of Floods, because in 2011, 2 days after the monsoon was declared, we had our
In 2019.
Insurance Council of Australia jump up and say, Herbert's the most flood-affected electorate in Australia. It's shocking. It's the most flood-affected. The Brisbane Times, the Courier Mail, national papers don't go to Townsville. It's the most flood-prone electorate of Australia. Is it? Well, we started doing some checks. So we went out and checked. And did you know that the ACCC had a flood map from IAG that they put in their report saying, no, we think Richmond is. Okay, so they can't agree. And then the Climate Council of Australia came back and said, no, you guys got it all wrong. Our evidence, actually they were the first one to say evidence because the only other two are proclamations. Our evidence says, no, it's not Shepparton, you wallies. So what happens is we have no consistency in where the floods are happening, and then those floods get marked up. Mind you, 6 months later, in the newspaper, we have this horrible report. Insurers reveal Townsville flood costs, warn the region is unprofitable, and we have to increase premiums in Townsville, sadly, because it's the most flood affected. This is why we want that if that comes out of a corporation, like ASX, if you make a mal statement to the market that damages to the corporation or damages the market, you can be asked to leave your post as a CEO. We have an insurance company that I've written to many of the CEOs saying, you said this in the paper, that's not true. After a few letters, they pull their head in. But on the same score, that should be a cultural fix if the CEO is forced to step down. It's got to be big spoon, but they're wearing complaints and penalties like a badge of honour now.
Okay, Mr. Turner, I think you've done a brilliant job in explaining to us as to why.
Give you a round up.
No. You don't have to convince us, mate. You've done a good job in convincing us about the need for better transparency and accountability. I mean, you've done an outstanding job today in your submission. I want to turn now to the Australian reinsurance bill.
Answer the question because I didn't get a chance around tax.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely. So insurance is we have to have it. We have no choice. If you have a loan, service a loan to do business, you have to have insurance. We have to pay bank charges. Yeah. They're not taxed. Not that I want to be taxed, but there's a number of things that we have to have that aren't taxed, sanitary products, etc. Why on earth is insurance taxed?
Okay. All right. Can we? You're talking to federal politicians here in terms of that taxes. So let's now talk about the Australian reinsurance pool. I want to talk about that because you've alluded to it. It's not directly inside the remit of this, but I'm a member of the Joint Standing Committee on Northern Australia, and we've done 2 reviews into that issue. And I'm interested because I think it was you, Ms. Brun-Smith, or you, Ms. Turner, who talked about the time frame because, of course, there's a 48-hour issue there. Now, the Morrison government led you to believe that all of a sudden we're going to bring this in and, there's going to be insurance. The New Jerusalem, Valhalla was coming in Northern Australia. Everything was, insurance premiums would plummet and all this was happening. Now, the ACCC's reports, I know it's early days still, but the ACCC's initial report was, it's making some minor difference, but not much, fairly modest. But I'm interested because we saw with Kirrily, it sort of hung around and hung around and hung around. This was a very unusual cyclone, but it meant that, people were getting flooded way beyond the 48-hour period, and it was downgraded to a tropical low, and all of a sudden, the hard cut-off cuts. The risk of this, of changing the 48-hour period, is you get people in Melbourne, by the way, being covered by a cyclone reinsurance pool when you start going too long. So I'm interested in where we go. Yeah, I know, but it becomes a situation where it's no longer a cyclone reinsurance pool, it becomes a flood reinsurance pool. And we are all paying massive amounts of money to effectively subsidise this. So I'm interested in hearing where you think we need to change it. And the other one I was going to say is we have received submissions in government things from the Australian Consumer Insurance Lobby, which of course is a North Queensland originated insurance lobby organisation, about some recommendations that have been put, and I'm interested in the Chamber of Commerce in Townsville and Townsville Enterprises as to your position in relation to their recommendations concerning this, which would have an impact on insurance. So if you want to take that on notice, I'm happy for you to do that.
So first one, I think the 48-hour rule for us, it's not just Kirralea where that happens. It happens almost in every kind of cyclone that you. The 48-hour rule is really where, if you think about the numbers, that's where the smallest amount of damage is done. It's up to 7 days when the rain is hanging around and the damage is actually done. So I don't think it needs to go all the way to Melbourne. I think, it needs to be located, and the fine print needs to say that whatever happens within 7 days, which is global standard for reinsurance pools or for insurance on flood, maybe floods after cyclones. What happens in these 7 days in the region that had the cyclone should be covered by the insurance companies, because what we've seen 2011 was personally our damage was happening probably the third day, where the property get inundated by floodwaters that were sort of building up over time and coming into then the home. So what we advocating for the changes in the reinsurance pool, one, obviously being 48-hour rule being extended to 7 days, but with the fine print for this region where the cyclone has happened. Second, make it mitigation. Then affordability, so supporting pensioners, supporting small business, supporting people that can't afford the insurance. They are the items that I think would make the reinsurance pool more palatable, but mitigation continues to be, as you look into the future, continues to be something we do need to address with local government.
I am interested on that issue, and I'll finish on this note. The commercial sum insured is $5 million under that reinsurance pool. Yeah. That seems to me, and the insurance, that lobby group I was talking about, were lobbying about the idea that that's a disincentive to expand commercial buildings in North Queensland.
Absolutely.
So they were talking about a $10 million or a $20 million limit and adjustment there. They're also talking about the inclusion of farms in how that is. And thirdly, aged care facilities often become places of refuge. Yeah. But under that reinsurance pool, they're categorised as commercial. So I'm just interested in, and take it on notice. You can come, or you can comment here now. Yeah. I'm interested in your response on that, because these are big things in North Queensland. Yeah. This reinsurance pool we thought was going to have a small impact, but when you consider all of the implications of that reinsurance pool, impact on aged care, impact on commercial construction and business community, impact on farming communities, that is a big thing. That is a big impact on your economy in North Queensland.
Yeah. Well, we've documented this within our submission, but we've requested there's a review of the whole insurance pool. There is the formal review date is in July 2025, when we'll pretty much, it came in, everyone had to be abiding by December 31st. So realistically, March, April, things start rolling through, which is why we're starting to see discounts, I believe, now. So July from now for a year is a full year of premiums, which would give us the data for a full year. So that's what I'm looking forward to hearing. But an interim review would be beneficial, because things like the period of time, the 48 hours, whether that was modelled by Treasury initially to encourage more insurers into the marketplace. So that is working, that we had 2 insurers come in pretty much straight away into the marketplace. But looking at what that is, because as Claudia mentioned, that reinsurance catastrophes define 7 days as a standard internationally. So there's that little bit of confusion around that. The $5 million limit for business, it doesn't make any sense, because $5 million is, you reach it in a heartbeat. It's just when you're bringing in other, not just property, but other elements of insurance. So we advocate for that to be reviewed and potentially increased.
And farms aren't included.
No. And farms aren't included, which
seems very odd.
It's so good that things
as
are
a Queenslander who represents a regional seat with lots of farming communities, I find that's very odd indeed.
So if you had a shed, like a processing shed on the main street of town, or you had a processing shed on agricultural land, the processing shed into the main street would be insured, but not. Yeah. But yet there's federal incentives to process closer to the pass to the farm, the paddock. So it's
No, No,
It's great to hear it from you because
It's a big impact. It's a big impact. Yeah, the other one I haven't even touched on is marine insurance issues, which is a massive issue in the north as well. And I'll go back to the chair because I'm sort of digressing off the topic a bit. But it does have a big impact on the economy of North Queensland, and therefore an insurance issue. Thanks, Chair.
Did you want to say one thing before you?
I kind of like the 48-hour rule, but the reason being is we've all paid up. The insurance companies have collected all the money. They've modelled the premiums years out ahead and said, hey, look, you're all insured except those who dropped out because you can drop out. But we've already collected all the money. Bring it on. We're ready for your cyclone or that there. But what happens is, as soon as we get a cyclone, they say, look at all the costs. That raises the question, who checks the costs? Because the one KPI out of all flood disaster reports, they never tell you how many full value replacement claims were made. Everyone gets a bit damaged, everyone gets a bit destruction there, but total write-off building, we don't know how many buildings have got 10% repairs or 100%. So what happens is the insurance companies are still keeping a lot of money. As you said, they made a lot of money during the disasters, even the recent ones, because no one from regulatory authorities, probably the tax office would be a good place to start, how much you spend on air travel, admin, food, buses, transport, all the incidentals not related to the property, but they're all supportive to the property. There is no exposure of that type of spending. So that's why they are predicting now in 2060, Deloitte's, geez, they like scary them. We're now sitting at $38 billion a year now, national disaster damage to the economy. They're saying, 2060, get ready for it, $73 billion. They control the cost numbers. No one knows, no one's had a look in. But if we had it down to postcode resolution, we know how much was paid in premiums and we know how much has been made in claims. You've got a lot of eyes watching that now. You've got a lot of eyes watching the accountability of that didn't happen. They even know personally where the shed is. So they know exactly what's going on. That would help government, would help coming back to your point, the main purpose of meaningful insurance. That's what we want. That's its job, looks after Australians. It's a lovely word, meaningful. It's good to hear it.
Okay, now I'll hand over to Mr G to finish us up in this session.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your evidence today. My name is Andrew G and I'm the Federal Member for Calare in Central Western New South Wales. And I think it's been a very good discussion today, very informative, and we've covered a lot of ground. I was just wondering, I think expert reports were mentioned briefly in some of the earlier evidence. I just wonder where the panel has any view on the way the expert reports are obtained, the availability of expert reports, and the issue of conflicting expert reports. I think that may have been mentioned earlier. Does anyone have any views on the way that expert reports are procured and obtained in following natural disasters?
He's not asking us, he's asking you.
Expert reports, you always turn from page 1 to page 3, who commissioned it, who wrote it, then you can see the flavour of it straight away. The insurance company, the insurance journalist, I was in Sydney there recently and went to a conference on strata insurance by the insurance media, and they reported that the experts are losing favour with the insurance industry because the experts are not experts. They're moving from being an expert to being involved. And there's numerous cases, Woodside and some Indigenous property up north got into that type of conversation too. So what happens is the validity of experts, they're fine, but we don't want it on modelling. We want it on evidence. If that evidence exists, we don't have it yet until our ACS gets its feet on the ground. We could have data, we could push back and say, no, we disagree with your expert. But experts are failing the industry at this stage.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No.
I think the only thing around reporting is it's great that we do have the ACCC report in December each year now on the insurance board, just as a baseline.
From them, though, because I keep writing to the minister saying how badly they've done. They still do not know after 7 years how many insured properties in this country and how many uninsured. So we don't know whether the market's dying at a rapid rate. We've got no idea.
So I did ask for that in the meeting I had with them in March, that we have that so we know, because we'd imagine that as the costs keep increasing, we're going to see a decrease in properties insured. And if we look up at what the impact of Jasper had up in the Cairns area, a number of people not insured were given grants to rebuild of up to $50,000. So effectively the government is the insurer of last resort, which is part of our original submission, that they already were paying a baseline insurance and that we're all paying for it. We're just not paying for it as an insurance premium. We're paying it through every other tax that we pay to the state and federal government. Paying twice, double dipping.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Do you think it would be useful for experts, when they're putting together these reports for insurance companies, to sign up to a code of conduct in the same way that they're required to do in legal proceedings, including setting out their qualifications, their expertise, and affirming that their views are, in fact, their own views and their own independent views? Do you think that would be useful?
Yeah.
Sorry, girl.
Go for it.
Experts, if you read the last round, I have a folder in my computer that I always just put down report, date of the year and the expert that wrote it, and I've got a lot of them, since 2011, just out of curiosity. And you find a lot of these reports there all default back to, where did we get our data from? Oh, we get it from the insurance company. And that's the sad fact. The ICA, the ACCC, our regulatory expert, default back to, and the Productivity Commission default back to insurance industry supplied data. They do not use consumer tax invoice data. They should be out there collecting it. They should get enough to audit our postcode every now and then for health checking. But until the experts move away from insurance company information, then we'll have a better picture. Our code of conduct won't work yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. No, that's
All right, thank you, Chair.
No, thanks very much. Well, look, thanks all for that. That was a very wide-ranging and very, very useful session. The committee secretariat will contact you in relation to any matters arising out of today's hearing. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence and will have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. So we'll now suspend proceedings briefly and resume at noon. Thank you.
Just finally, with the
Commence proceedings. I now welcome representatives of volunteering North Queensland and Far North Queensland volunteers, and thank you both for appearing. This is a really important part of the response to major natural disasters. And I also want to particularly appreciate the representative from Far North Queensland volunteers for making such a long drive down to Queensland to participate, so very much appreciated. I wish to advise that while the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, hearings are legal proceedings of the Australian Parliament, and the giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter which could be regarded as contempt of the Parliament. Before I ask you each to make an opening statement, could I please ask that you just state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee. So I'll start on my left with Ms Ryder.
Yep. Margie Ryder, I'm President of Volunteering North Queensland.
Great.
And I'm Annette Shepherd, I'm President of FNQ Volunteers.
Fantastic. So look, whichever of you wants to go first, I'll now invite you to make opening statements.
Yeah, okay. Introducing both of us and a little bit of background.
Yep.
Margie and I, between us, have almost 4 decades experience as councillors in 4 different local government areas. The reason that I served on 2 councils was an amalgamation, and Margie was in Julia Creek and subsequently Townsville. So between us, we do have a lot of experience with regard to disasters and disaster management, what happens in the aftermath, etc., and also experience with the LDMG. So our particular interest, though, is emergent volunteers.
Yep.
And what I'd like to say is that we hear a lot of what happens post-disaster. However, what happens post-disaster is often dependent on what has happened pre-disaster. And of concern to both of us for some particular period of time, we're part of a consortium of 4 volunteer resource centres: Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Townsville and Cairns. So between us, we collaborate on projects, we collaborate on exchanges of information and so forth. All of us have had experience with disasters and emergent volunteers during the disaster period. All of us have major concerns about what is happening before the disaster even occurs, because there's very little preparation in place for the deployment of emergent volunteers or spontaneous volunteers during that period of time after the disaster. And it's not necessarily managed well. How does this relate to insurance? Well, of course it relates to insurance on lots and lots of levels. For example, one of the key issues in deploying volunteers, for whatever reason, is that we have to carry insurance. We have to carry volunteer insurance. I checked with our accountant. Currently, our organisation is paying in excess of $4,000 a year for volunteer insurance, which for a not-for-profit organisation dependent on limited funding is a huge whack out of our budget. So we have to stretch ourselves. Imagine all of those other organisations, and if you look at the makeup of the LDMG, they draw on the expertise of different not-for-profit organisations, volunteer involving organisations and so forth. So we don't place volunteers with any organisation unless they have volunteer insurance, which again is a really big impost on those not-for-profit organisations who are dependent on limited funding. So with regard to the spontaneous volunteering, our $4,000 a year doesn't cover that. It only covers the a certain number of volunteers. I think that our number is probably up to 20 volunteers over the period of that year. So for us to be responsible for emergent volunteers, spontaneous volunteers during that short window of time, the cost to us is enormous. Let me refer to our most recent disaster in Cairns, which was Jasper. Jasper itself was a fizzler. It hardly had any impact on the community at all. However, we had a deluge afterwards. So that what happened then, we had disastrous flooding in places that had never flooded before. And I can categorically say that because I grew up in one of those communities where the flooding was most disastrous. So why was it so disastrous this time? Very, very simply, and I refer back to my councillor experience, is that back in the 90s, the state government introduced this policy of the 1 in 100 level for developments. So what happened immediately? Because they had old approvals and so forth, old zonings and so forth, the developers said, not a problem, there's an engineering solution to everything. So they promptly filled these, what had previously been detention absorption areas for the overflow from these major events, because we've always gotten them. And we now have a major displacement of water into areas that previously contained the water, but now are built on, so the water's diverted into these suburbs. I'm sure that you've seen the footage of those floods. They were disastrous. It was terrible. So that, of course, has major implications for insurance premiums on people's homes and all of those kinds of things. Where do volunteers fit into this? What we ended up with, and I'll use that disaster as the example, council were not prepared. I have been talking to them. That submission that I gave to you, I gave to Cairns Regional Council the end of 2019-2020. Initially, there was a response to it. Oh, yes, you know, this is good, blah, blah, blah. Then it went into the bowels of the organisation in silence. The mayor at the time was also the chair of the LDMG. I'm going to make a suggestion up front, and I know that the LDMGs are a state responsibility. However, I'm sure that you've been talking about state-federal partnerships, etc., particularly with funding. The LDMGs are traditionally chaired by councillors who have zero experience in the area of disasters. They chair these committees, these LDMGs. Quite frankly, they do not know what they're doing. We have attended LDMG meetings ad infinitum. They just go round and round and round. I can show you minutes of successive meetings. They are ill-prepared for disasters. The chair of those committees should be someone with experience in the area. They should be somebody, for example, it could have been from the ADF, it could have been from a similar organisation, whatever, but it certainly should not be people without experience. So, moving back to volunteers. What actually happened was I got anxious after a day, post-Jasper and with the floods coming down and all the rest of it, and I thought, I don't think anything's happening here. So I phoned Volunteering Queensland, who have courage of the EV crew. And I said, what's happening in Cairns with relation to the EV crew? Because I'd heard nothing. They said, nothing. And I said, what do you mean nothing? And they said, we haven't been activated. And I said, okay, tell me what needs to be done. They told me. I immediately got on the phone to a guy at the LDMG, and he said, I am so glad you've just phoned in it. I have just this minute walked out of a meeting and they have told me that I'm in charge of this. I've got to sort out this volunteer thing. I thought, that's great. You were prepared, weren't you? Not so. So anyway, I gave him the information. Subsequently, we had some Teams meetings with VQ and a number of other stakeholders, etc. And they sort of got their act together days later, which meant that their management of the emergent volunteers was pretty rudimentary. They got people out, they got some people that were registering, because in the meantime, the Cairns community had responded. They set it all up themselves. They set up a mud army. No insurance. Nothing. Zero. None of these people, and there were thousands of people who responded as volunteers to assist with this clean-up. No insurance. High risk. We all know that you go into a flood area where the floods have gone down, you've got untreated sewage, you've got all sorts of stuff in that mud. It is high risk for disease. It's high risk if you cut yourself. You can end up septic, you can end up over at the hospital on a drip. My son actually ended up in hospital after one of the cyclones doing a clean-up, got an injury to his shin. He ended up in hospital for 5 days on major antibiotic treatment, etc., etc. This is what can happen. Yeah. So, where does that leave us? What actually happens then? Because they haven't been given instructions, they put people at risk, actually, of not being able to claim on their own house insurance because they remove the evidence. They go in with good hearts. I'm going to clean up. I'm going to help you. Oh, welcome with open arms. So they shift everything out onto the footpath or whatever. The place is cleared. There's no evidence. So people then have problems with their insurance companies because they're supposed to leave things in situ for their assessors to come in and check out. How do they know once it's all been moved what was actually there in the first place? So I guess this issue of emergent spontaneous volunteering in the wake of a disaster needs to be sorted before the disaster. We need to have stuff in place for that assistance to happen, and it's not happening. I don't think that there are very many councils across Queensland who actually have something firmly in place for the management of those spontaneous volunteers. The other issue is that they talk about DRA, the Defence, what is it?
Disaster Relief Australia.
Yeah, who have been funded for, I believe, something like close to $40 million or so.
38 million.
Fantastic. They don't get deployed for 12 to 14 days after the disaster. So they're of no use, are they, in that immediate clean-up? What do they do? I'm not quite sure. And I step back from that because they have been support in that period where there's major clean-up stuff to happen and everything. So it's no criticism of the work they do. All I'm saying is that there is that 14-day gap between when they come on board and when the community responds to that disaster. So the implications insurance-wise, the insurance covering volunteers themselves and the householders' insurance. Because, you know, it's it's heartrending enough for those householders without then having problems and struggles with their insurance companies, which I know they have had. So, yeah, we need to be prepared beforehand. We need to have measures in place, and I've given you a proposal there. And I know again that that's a state responsibility, it's a local government responsibility, but in bringing it to your attention, it says this is part of the mix. This is where we need to be prepared better for that. We need to be able to hit the ground running and get on with it and do what we need to do to help people in that period of time.
No, thank you very much. Did you want to?
Mine's similar, very similar story. So we're in the process. So I've had long meetings with DRA, SES, the local council, and we're preparing a document similar to, you know, we're all on the same page. Big thing for us was business continuity in case we got wiped out. The Gold Coast, which is one of our consortium, they got up and took over our platform for us just in case we got wiped out. And I probably just wanted to, you know, bring that to your attention as well, knowing that behind the scenes there is business continuity, but we all need to know what are we going to tell our volunteers. Like in 2019, we had young Traden Fulmer, 15-year-old, who stood up nearly 200 volunteers. We had a young pastor in Bluewater who stood up another gang of 100. They went into people's houses. Luckily, touch wood, there were no incidents, no one got hurt, but the fact is now, because we want to put this spontaneous volunteer out there, we're about to announce and say, come and sign up before, let's get prepared, but we can't do those workshops because we don't know what's going to happen with insurance. We can't tell all those organisations, like DRA have got a very clear, they go in, put the green tape up, they know what to do with the insurance, they've been trained, and I've been talking to them. But people are going to step up, the trade and formers of the world are going to step up, but they're leaning up to us and council, and I was chair of economic recovery in the last disaster. I didn't know that information either. So nobody knows what happens with the volunteers and the private individuals. We just need clarity.
No, look, this is really a set of really important issues, and it's a national set of issues. In my own electorate, following the floods in 2022, we had a huge mud army, and greatly appreciated. There were many streets where basically everybody's belongings had to go out into the street. But the question is, firstly, making sure that people are safe when they're doing it as volunteers, but secondly, as you say, that it's done in a way which protects people's interests in making their claims.
Well, they need PPE as well.
Well, so look, I just wanted to start with the issue of insurance, your insurance, and then get on to the issue of preparation. But on the issue of insurance, I mean, my thinking is that your premiums are going up like everybody's premiums in this space, but that based on the nature of the organisations that bring together volunteers, it's just not realistic for you to cover the insurance for large numbers of people. So
we can't. The clarity, so Chris from Sunshine Coast, I said to him, and when I was discussing with council and DRA, they said, so how many people, if we relied on you and we took on this? So I went to Aon and I sent him a detailed email and said, if I was to have 20 volunteers, because we're the same, and send them out to the field, do they need some sort of induction PPE? No one can give me the answer. And yet the churches, I could send 20 volunteers to them, same thing, they took them out in the field, and I asked, no one can give me the answer. But DRA and SES, they've got great systems. I can send them volunteers, but they do the inductions before they go out to their field. So who does the inductions? You know, no insurance company can actually give me clarity. And I said, even if you sent me a page and said, this is the induction, you've got to give them. No, but nobody's taking ownership of it.
Yeah, so look, we'll take all of that on board. And look, there's no simple answer here, I suspect, but my initial thinking is that probably this is going to have to be resolved at a state level, and it might be dovetailing with an emergency service, but it's clearly not going to be able to be achieved through often spontaneous organisations, not just spontaneous volunteers.
We're currently in discussions with the state government. We've had a number of meetings now with the Department of Communities and, and this is one of the issues that we've brought up consistently. I've also given them this. So this is the whole thing, is that we don't know, even for that volunteer insurance, we don't know what we're supposed to do to ensure that they're actually covered, because it's not just simply paying your premium and then sending them out. You've got to comply with, do they have the appropriate PPE? Have they been inducted properly? Do they have blah, blah, blah? Have we done a risk management of the site that we're sending them to? It goes on and on. So it's not as simple as paying the premium. The insurance companies are happy. They're wonderful. Give me your premium. But then we can't get any sense out of them as to what we're supposed to do so to ensure that those volunteers are covered.
And even as of yesterday, I spoke to the CEO of Volunteering Queensland, because we're trying to get the EV crew, no use reinventing the wheel, should be streamlined and simplified all around Queensland. But I asked her the direct question yesterday, because I'm putting this paper together. So just to clarify, who covers the insurance when the state steps up and all those volunteers get registered and you send them out? Who does that? She said, I don't know. And that was yesterday's phone call. And so I quickly emailed all of us, because we're putting this paper together, and I've asked Maria to put out the workshops. But until I know that answer, I've actually come to a stop as well.
All that we know, actually, is that the state owns the EV
crew.
What is
EV crew?
Yeah, whatever.
Yep.
They fund Volunteering Queensland to set up the IT, to set up the systems. Excuse my lack of language in that area. It's not my area.
Yep.
So they set it up where people register and everything. So we've been very curious. So who actually carries the indemnity for volunteers? Is it Volunteering Queensland or is it the Queensland government? We can't get the answer. We don't know.
No. So, look, thanks for raising all those issues. Look, the only other issue I was going to touch on, and then I'll hand over to Mr Newman if you've got questions, is this issue of the pre-preparation. And, look, one of the issues that's come up, and it's a related issue, is that immediately following natural disasters, there are situations where people in the same street, one insurer is saying, just take a few photos and clean your house out. The next insurer is saying, don't do anything till our assessor arrives.
Yep.
But in that latter situation, that might be weeks, and that seems to be a very suboptimal outcome. So what we're thinking about as a committee is that the industry probably needs to come to a standardised approach there, and that basically that should be communicated to people through an industry vetted and regulator vetted communication, where that's emailed but also in hard copy at the emergency hubs, so that people get much more clarity as to what should I do. But my sense is that would also help volunteers in that basically, and my instinct is, and look, well, let's see what all the experts say, but probably the better approach is to take a whole bunch of photos and then clear it out rather than to wait potentially weeks.
Well,
but
you end up with vermin in the place. If you just leave it sitting there, you get mould, you get disease-bearing organisms, bacteria, all sorts of stuff.
But if that standardised information went to householders, then it could also go to volunteers, so everybody's on the same page.
Sorry, DRA have already got an acceptable, they've been accredited and approved to do the assessment on the house. Doesn't matter what and whose insurance is. So I'm curious, DRA have already got that. And I'd say they paid for that or got that from their 38 million that they got. But if they've already got something in place, why reinvent the wheel? They're the only ones that can go in after, and they've been up in the Queensland disaster management, they're in there. And I asked John Ring the direct question, and he said, we can go in there, we've been legislated or approved to do the assessment whether they can go in to do with insurance. So SES can't, I had SES at the table. So DRA have already got this system. So why reinvent the wheel?
Well, they might, but I think also though, if it's going to add value with insurers.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
just so, because what we don't want, we want the insurers across the board to have a system where whatever happens, if it's according to a certain agreed process, that people's claims won't be negatively impacted. And a lot of this, I think, comes down to common sense. If people take a whole bunch of photos, then that should just be evidence enough.
It should.
And then clear it out.
And is that one of your recommendations?
Well, we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, I suspect we will end up with a recommendation that there should be a standardised approach. What that is, I think probably will leave to the experts.
It's the only logical thing to do because there is so much confusion out there. We get one story for one household, this is my experience, another one from another one.
Yeah. Okay, Mr Newman.
Yeah, I want to come back to Ms Shepherd, these disaster management committees. I've seen councillors who develop real expertise in this area and are very, very good in chairing these committees. But I've seen others who've been absent who seem to be completely all at sea. Is, in your experience in council, is there any training given to these councillors to do this sort of work in, you know, a professional development?
Short answer, no.
Yep.
Longer answer is that the LDMGs do training along the way. Look, there's an assumption, and I'm sure Margie will agree with you, is that before you get elected, your ordinary merry citizen or whatever, the minute you get elected, you are gifted and you know all. You don't need training. I'm being facetious.
I know that.
But there is a perception, and I'm sure as parliamentarians, you've had that experience, that the minute you're elected, your electorate somehow thinks that you have all of this knowledge that, you know, you really have to search for, and so forth. That's no reflection on you.
No, if it wasn't being recorded on a Hansard, I could say some very interesting things about that. That's absolutely true. I agree. I mean, but I am interested in that. I don't agree with you. I do not agree with Ms Shepherd about the absence of civilian control. We do bring in the military later on. But I do think local council is the closest to the people, if I can put it like that. And so I do think there needs to be a continuation of coordination at the local council level.
Absolutely.
And I think I've seen, you know, agencies at state levels not really responsive and really not being, you know, I mean, I've seen areas where people are running out of food and medicines, etc. Yet we've got state authorities saying it's all fine. But the councils are saying, hang on a second, we know because we're speaking to the school principal wherever it was at this little country town, and I know that the school principal's got them holed up in the school and they're running out of food. But, you know, there's been examples of that I could give you on many occasions. So I do think we should continue, but I am interested because in the local council's response, because this impacts generally on insurance, has, you know, how do you protect things, how to make sure people's properties are protected, how to protect individuals. Because as you say, you know, I mean, let's be really honest, the waters that are a combination of faeces and urine and mud, I mean, it's just, you know, you see people doing all manner of stupid things, you know, when they should be get out of the water, you know. But I am interested in that role because the role of council in this area, because we don't sit naturally, by the way, as a federal MP on those committees, which I think we probably should, frankly, to be honest with you, but we don't. But I am interested in the role of council, if you can explore that in disaster management, and I'm interested in hearing your experience on that.
The short answer is that councillors themselves have very little training, very little induction into it. If you're part of the LDMG, obviously you're closer to it. Councillors generally will rely on their officers and the people that they appoint to those positions. Cairns Council has systematically disenfranchised the LDMG in Cairns over the past probably 5 or 6 years. They have reduced the staffing. They've deployed people who were previously involved into other positions in council and so forth. So they've effectively nullified a lot of what the LDMG does in preparation. And we have the consequence of what happened during Jasper. The council officers are depended on a lot. So the council officers went out into the field doing cleanups and doing things and everything. But as far as the training goes, they have exercises so many times a year or whatever, but they're very theoretical. So I'll go back to that pre-disaster. There's not a lot really that's done to inform people and to prepare them to be on the ground as soon as the danger's passed.
Right. Can I ask this question? In a report that was done by Paul de Jersey, the former Queensland Governor and former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Queensland, commissioned at the request of the Brisbane City Council, he recommended, and it picked up a review that happened after the 2011 flood, and this was his report after the 2022 flood. He recommended that we establish more community hubs, places of safety and refuge for people. Now, Brisbane had about 3, can I tell you, in 2022, a lot more earlier. Ipswich had really 1 and had previously multiple of these in the 2011 flood. But I'm interested in the experience in the north, because what's happened in my observation, happened in the Somerset, happened elsewhere. My observation is that councils don't like establishing these community hubs. They do not like them doing that. And there's a trend away from establishing these hubs, which are places of refuge for people to protect their animals, their themselves, their property that they often bring with them, their valuables, etc., which are subject to insurance policies, I might add. So I'm interested in the experience in Cairns and Townsville as to whether, in fact, these community hubs are being created, or are Townsville and Cairns adopting the same attitude as South East Queensland councils and reducing the number of community hubs, contrary to what Paul de Jersey recommended?
Yeah. Subsequent to that, the Red Lynch State College built a recreation centre, which was built to the standard to double up to become one of these centres. So the interesting thing, though, you mentioned the animals, is that they don't let people bring their pets into the refuge, the place.
Ipswich Showgrounds does as a result of me and the president of the Show Society.
There you go. So a lot of people are reluctant to go there because they want to bring their cat or their dog or their birds or whatever. As I understand it, I think maybe Fretwell Park on the southern side of the city may also be built to that standard, but that's a vague recollection in my mind. Certainly people go there, but you're right, there are very limited places where people can go and be directed to, and council is really reluctant
The big problem.
to direct people into those centres.
Not enough centres. So we're seeing neighbours looking after neighbours,
Yes.
food being swapped between people sharing medicines,
Yep.
and where if you were going to the community hub, there would be availability of Red Cross and a whole range of other
Yes.
areas.
Yes.
I mean, I've been in that situation where I was organising, pharmaceuticals on medical advice and with the support of Ipswich General Hospital and other places. Now, what really happens when people aren't going to those community hubs, which there's far too few of in my view, is that people put themselves at risk, because if they're on medications and they don't get them, they can't get them. they're at risk. So life, health and safety is at risk. I think this has a big impact because therefore that affects their property, their insurance and a whole range of issues.
Yep.
So I'm interested so Townsville and Cairns have been reluctant to establish these community hubs.
No, sorry, I'm completely different.
You're different?
So,
What do you think, Margie?
Absolutely, yeah, so I'd like to have some comment on
Yeah,
this. So
please do it.
I was a councillor for 8 years. The
Yep.
first 4 years I was not on the actual local disaster management as a chair.
Yep.
So as a local councillor, in my area I was Division 1. So
Are you in Townsville?
I'm Townsville.
Yeah, okay.
So we have community halls that are recovery centres and they're on the outskirts of Townsville. So in 2019, I was not a chair at the LDNC. My role was to be in community to do what you said before, and people brought food, we shared. It was like a place. It was still designated a recovery centre, so Red Cross come in and everyone got their services, but they stayed open and people come and looked after each other. Food was dropped off. That's what we were coordinating out there. Then in my second term, I become chair of finance. Yeah. So economic recovery for Townsville. Mm-hmm. So I was given training. We did role play. It was like we actually had a disaster.
Simulation.
It was a simulation. So, but that never prepared me for what actually come. But when you said the issue we've got now is why councils, what I believe as a councillor, is not propping up these evacuation centres because of the cost and the new building requirements.
But they pass the cost on to the federal and state.
No, they don't. So our council are actually paying, I'll use 2 community halls. One, most of the halls back in the day were built by the community. They still own them, they still run them, they did a peppercorn lease. What's happening now is 30 years later, when the 11.5% decline in volunteers has happened, who pays for the septic system when it happens? 150,000. They're not going to do chook raffles. So what's happening is they're now pushing back on council and said, mate, we haven't got the money. So council has to pick it up. Then we've got a new build.
Yeah, but it's often at school halls that the state government own.
No, they're evacuation centres, but because these are outlying areas, they're just community halls that are recovery, that by chance they just turn up and become a place where people go.
Yeah.
So the evacuations...
Are they official? Sanctioned?
They're not evacuation centres.
So this is the point I'm making.
Yes,
exactly.
So Margie, you and I don't disagree at all.
No, but that's...
But what I'm saying is, the point I'm making to Ms Shepherd is that in fact the official sanctioned recovery centre, where you've got Red Cross and the Salvation Army and all that, that this is what we're saying here in Queensland is council saying, we're not going to pay for that cost. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do it. So people form their own. I could give you examples in my electorate where Riverview Neighbourhood House established one, St Joseph Catholic Church established. That's spontaneous. Yeah. And councils are reluctant to sanction them and send people there. So we don't send Services Australia.
Yeah, they don't send people to any of those places.
Yeah, exactly. So the point I'm making to you is that has impact on the things that we have to do.
Mm.
Yeah. There are very few places that have been built to the proper standards to accommodate people during the disaster. Like, we hear a cyclone's coming, this is category 3.
And we need to fund it, I think, under the Disaster Ready Fund.
Yeah.
This is what I think we should be funding, these community hubs, because this is disaster resilient.
But we should be building them in the places where, like these places where the recovery is where these evacuations...
Or modifying the schools and the church halls and that sort of stuff to make it available.
Yeah, but you need to upgrade them, because no use reinventing the wheel, because these are picked in areas isolated, cut off from the road, and you need to just either update buildings, bring them into the new and make them evacuations.
And councils need to step up on this area.
But the thing is also, though, is that they have to identify locations that are the safest locations to locate these things. It may unfortunately not be in a school area, like with the Red Lynch one, it's doubles up as the school.
Yeah, I know churches that they do it.
Yeah, so Look, you're absolutely right, and it's those evacuation centres that are lacking.
Yeah.
And what we found that our council does, of course, is encourage people to stay in their own homes.
Yep.
Yes.
So, you know, you've got elderly folk. We do the ACVVS scheme, the Aged Care Volunteer Visitor Scheme, and we visit people in their homes.
Yep.
They really, in a lot of instances, it's unsafe to keep them in their homes, so they should be taken to an evacuation centre or whatever.
Yeah, I think you've confirmed my suspicion that the north of Queensland is very similar, in the far north, very similar to the southeast,
totally.
where councils are not picking up their responsibility.
Yep.
But
And
councils-
Margie's right, is
they
that
can't
The
afford-
community's picking it up.
Yeah, but they can't afford to build these evacuation centres. Like the biggest issue we had after the last one is all the NDIS patients. There was not enough evacuation centres, so guess where they sent them?
Where?
All to the hospital. So then the hospital was
They went
sitting
to
at
the
the
church.
table.
Oh, true.
Yep, because they had nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, they went to
And we
the
didn't have
grammar
enough evacuation places. Yep.
All right.
Thanks. Mr G.
Sorry.
No, we have a member
Yes,
online.
thank you. Thank you, Chair. My name's Andrew G. I'm the federal member for Calare in central western New South Wales. And we've had a lot of natural disasters in recent times, including bushfires, drought, and obviously flood in November 2022. So I haven't got any specific questions, but just following on from the last discussion on evacuation centres, I have seen the good and the bad in terms of council, government and community responses to that. And I've seen evacuation centres not being opened in smaller communities because maybe there wasn't enough preparation in terms of disaster readiness, but also for cost savings. In the last floods that hit the Central West in November 2022, a small community called Cudal, very vibrant community in our electorate here in Calare, got very badly hit. And it was late at night that all of this happened. And the community then, as you indicated, just got together and opened up their own evacuation centre at the bowling club, and indeed started feeding people from that club. Food was coming in there. And they actually got criticised for it from in some official quarters because it wasn't officially sanctioned, but these folks just did it because there was a need there and there wasn't any other help there. They had to do it themselves because, it's not part of a major regional centre. They're out on their own, and they did extraordinarily well. One thing I would also comment on is just the volunteers and how they're coordinated. I'd be interested to get your views on it. But when Eugowra experienced its disastrous event, which was the biggest helicopter rescue in Australia's history, a couple of days later, the so-called Mud Army came in, and we had there were a lot of people trying to do their best to help, but there was no one coordinating where they should go or tasking these folks. So you had well-intentioned people coming in and throwing out people's furniture and putting it out on the street, which was subsequently then piled into trucks to take to the tip. So a lot of people lost their furniture, which could have been recovered. There was no real coordination of the civilian effort there. Even though we had the New South Wales government in there and officials on the ground, they refused to get involved in anything to do with the coordination of volunteers, including the massive amounts of clothing that were pouring in from all over the country, food which was pouring in, builders and tradies turning up wanting to be tasked. There was a lot of heavy machinery moving around the streets, which made it unsafe. There were some suggestions of, some unscrupulous theft or looting going on. And I think the one thing that I really noticed was that there really does need to be a greater governmental control of the civilian response effort following these disasters. I don't know if you folks have a comment on that.
Oh, we totally agree in relation to the government needs to come in to give us some direction of the coordinated approach. We've got a proposal on the table which says exactly that, And that's what we believe 100% should happen. Somebody should come in for the 10 to 12 days and manage the spontaneous volunteers.
The other issue too for Queensland is that we have regional organisations of council. So there's regions where the councils all get together and form what we call a ROC. There's a potential there for something to happen at the ROC level where all of the councils within that region collaborate and cooperate on putting together an emergent volunteer or spontaneous volunteering plan so that the disasters don't just cover one local government area, they cover generally one, two or several or more. So if we had some sort of regional coordination where the framework is set for those emergent volunteers and people are trained, those people can be deployed into whatever area they're needed to do the work. And essentially that's what we've put forward in our submission.
And running off that, in 2019, after the floods, it actually headed out west to Julia Creek, Cloncurry area. They rang us and said, how will we manage our volunteers? How will they register? What will we do with it? Like, there was nothing. They literally, and still to this day, they've got nothing. So if a natural disaster happens next week, there is no platform, there is nothing except for the EV crew, which has got to be activated by the state.
Yeah, very good point. It's a massive void in the disaster response that I think all levels of government, but in particular local and state, need to get on top of. We had, out at Eugowra, we had a Navy veteran who basically set up a desk at the evacuation centre at the showground and was, with a little bit of help from some volunteers, was actually tasking work in Eugowra because no one else would do it. We had local residents and then ultimately Rotary coming in to try to coordinate and sort all of the clothing out. But in some cases they were being criticised by governmental members for doing this work that no one else would do. I mean, it was a serious issue which I saw, and certainly does need to be addressed through better preparation and coordination. But I think the points that you've made through your submissions there are really excellent. So well done, and thank you for sharing them. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. What you've said is really invaluable too, because you confirmed effectively what our experience has been.
Yeah, and I also think that in terms of just the way we treat our volunteers and make them feel valued, it's not great to have government people criticising them for stepping in and they're performing a valuable service and ultimately they don't want to do it if they're getting flack and criticism from official quarters. And their response to the New South Wales government was, well, you do it. We're happy for you to do it. We'll go, but you can sit here at the desk and do it. But they just would not do it. And it's just such a serious issue that we as a country should be able to get on top of, and we should be able to do better by our volunteers. And also by doing that, we can help more victims of natural disasters. I think it's really important to get on top of this. So it's a big body of work. So well done for raising it.
Thank you.
And through the chair, can I just add, because I only just had this meeting with council last week, is they're waiting for us to come to them with DRA, SES and our volunteers for a solution, because after Kirralee, I sat with them, there's literally a list of jobs of what needed to be done, and he was about to administer them, but DRA have got to come in and give a quote to actually do those jobs. And then we had a bunch of volunteers who said, well, we can do those for free, but who's gonna, that's where the stumbling point is.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is the DRA, not only did they get their 40 odd million or whatever it was, it may have been more or less, but when you're talking 40 million, who cares, they actually charge for their service then to the councils if they come into an area. So, where did all that money go? I don't know. because they don't kick in until 12 to 14 days afterwards.
Yeah. No, look, thank you so much. And the very important issues that you've raised. And I think that the committee will very much appreciate your submission and look at it very carefully. But can I also just say thank you for all that you do personally in helping your community after natural disasters, and also your long service on council. It's incredibly important.
We could be here for another couple of hours, but we know that there's limited time.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you also for the long trip to get here. Much appreciated.
No, that was great. And thank you, Tess.
Beautiful drive.
Thank you, Tess, for taking our calls and making this happen, because that was really well done.
No, a very, very useful session to finish up with here. So I thank all witnesses for their time today, especially to those people who have taken time off work, caring and other commitments to provide their experiences to the committee or driven. It's been a very, very useful day for our committee to have received so much input from the Townsville community. Thank you.
Thank you.
I declare this public hearing closed.